Let's check on our situation. Sentinels, report, Claude instructed. Each one confirmed that everything was stable. Chap paused his chat with Tino to share that the helicopter was likely carrying missiles made in Russia, then returned to his talk. Carl added that NATO calls the Russian missile whirlwinds. Seeing the surprised looks from the others, he smiled and said, "Relax, because they are guided by a laser. They can only reach about 5 kilometers or 5 miles at night. So, we'll be in their range when they're in ours." "Sheriff Goodson, are you listening?" Claude asked. "I am, Rob. Our connection is safe, right?" "Yes," Claude confirmed. "Why? Do you have something for us?" "I do. Don't be too quick to use the stingers. It's complicated, but I'm working on a better plan. Focus on the vans." Sheriff, we're ready to intercept the vans, and I believe we can handle whoever is inside. But a missile shot from a few miles away is a different issue, if we don't react before they get close. Be patient, Rob. Trust me. Command, this is Alpha. I see a helicopter coming from the northeast. It's 6 miles out, flying low and fast. Anything else, Alpha? The sheriff asked. This is Beta. I spot 2 fast vehicles coming from the northwest. I see them now. They are getting close, Alpha added. Stay calm, everyone. You may not know, but I'm a retired Air Force officer, and my best friend is the commander of the Texas Air National Guard at Fort Bliss. He wasn't aware of any exercises in our area, but he sent a couple of fighter jets to check things out. That's probably them. I have all 3 on radar now, Carl announced. They will meet around the 4-mile mark, which puts us near the range of their missiles. Sheriff, are they allowed to fire? They are permitted to take any action needed to protect civilians from unknown aircraft. Stay calm and let this unfold. A laser beam is coming towards the house, Gamma warned. We prepared for an impact overhead, hoping the bunker ceiling was as strong as planned. The helicopter is turning away, shouted Alpha. It's moving east along the valleys and the fighter jets are circling. Delta 2, we have 3 vehicles coming in from the highway, activating Operation Rocking Chair. Delta 1, understood. Delta 3, understood. Epsilon, understood. Eta, understood. Sheriff, understood. Theta Command, moving into position. Iota and Kappa Command will stay. With the air threat reduced, I left the bunker with Chap, Coyote, and Gato. We set up in the command post facing west, trusting the remaining threats were in the vans. I used the remote to move the bulldozer enough onto the road to partly block it. The vans couldn't get through, but the sheriff still had a clear shot with his gun. I looked at El Chaparral, who was listening to his phone and smiling. So? I'm on mute. Raimundo and his brother are arguing, and it sounds intense. Ronaldo is threatening to hurt him badly when he gets back to Mexico. Has Mundo told him about his family yet? I asked. He let Ray run out of steam first. He just started, Chap replied with a laugh. Delta 2, getting close. Are we good to go? Go, I repeat, go, I said calmly. We watched as the van stopped near the bulldozer. A quick shot from the sheriff's gun destroyed the first van's engine. An explosion then lifted the third van from the ground, and men hidden near the road shot at the tires of the van in the middle, the one with Reynaldo Escamilla inside. Get me Reynaldo, I told Chap. He unmuted himself and handed me the phone. The Escamilla brothers were still arguing in Spanish when I shouted, Stop it! This is Rob McGregor. You must remember me, Raimundo after all. You put a hit on my ex-wife, my 2 kids, and me, bringing others to harm us. Now, you're stuck between 2 broken-down vehicles, and I have men ready to strike at my command. Want to talk, or would you prefer to finish this now? What do you want? Ronaldo asked defiantly. I want to know why. What threat do we pose to you? I asked. You put my friend Robert in jail. He owes me a lot of money he can't pay while he's there. I was planning to deal with him, but he told me he took out big insurance policies on his wife and each of your kids. He's the only one who gets that money, so he offered me a lot to take care of all 4 of you instead. Nothing personal. It's just business. I know you can't go anywhere, but if you want to live a bit longer, stay in the van and wait for me to call you back. Meanwhile, your brother can keep you updated on your family and give you a business report, too. I contacted the sheriff and asked, Is it okay if I walk down and talk to you? He replied yes and got out of the back of the Humvee. We met behind the building and I asked what he thought we should do. He scratched his ear and then his jaw. He sighed and said he wished this situation hadn't happened because the costs of the trials were going to drain the already small budget of our county. Unless he handed the case over to the federal government, he would have to deal with their endless paperwork for years. We talked over our choices for a few minutes, and then walked back to our posts. We had agreed to do the right thing and take the remaining individuals into custody, but Ronaldo changed our plans when he and his men jumped out of the van and began shooting into the air. Our team quickly took cover behind the rocks as the doors opened. The men from the first van also jumped out and started shooting at shadows. The sheriff fired his Gatling gun and I shouted, "Go, go, go," into the radio. 2 rocket-propelled grenades exploded near where the enemy gathered by the vans, and then gunfire rained down on those left standing. In less than a minute, everything went quiet. The sheriff commanded his armored Humvee to cross the bridge. He turned on a large spotlight to scan the area. After a few minutes, he told our team it looked safe to move closer, but we should be cautious. They emerged from the rocks on the narrow ridge and approached the vans, but found no one left. "Mundo, this is Rob. It looks like you are in charge now. We had a deal. Is it still on?" "Yes, Rob. My brother's pride won't be a problem for the business or my family anymore. The contract has been canceled, and I will make it clear when we meet tomorrow that you and your family will be safe from now on. You might want to stay out of sight for a few weeks, just in case others outside our group haven't heard the news. But I promise the bounty is no longer active, and those who usually handle that will know very soon. I'm trusting you with this, Mundo. But I want you to know that the Brotherhood, the militia, and my contacts in Mexico will stay alert until everything is settled. Use your education wisely now. Get rid of anything that could threaten me or my interests. I'll respect your space and your family, and we can continue to work together just fine, my friend." At this point, the sheriff and his 2 deputies took charge. With help from Claude's team, the bodies were gathered and loaded into 3 dump trucks that showed up unexpectedly and then drove away. Before dawn, the remains of the vans were taken away on trailers, heading to the northwest. A road repair crew arrived as dawn broke, and our team was already collecting all the spent shells they could find. The welder who made my pipe gate was busy fixing the 8-inch steel anchor post that had been damaged earlier. Once he finished that, he would put the gate back in place. After the road was repaired, I moved my bulldozer back to the old battleground. By late morning, it looked like we had just cleared and leveled the last stretch of land in front of the bridge. This was to help direct the water away from the newly paved road. By 8:30, everyone was out of the bunker, and breakfast was ready. Caitlin, Doc, and Coyote rode down on the mule, bringing 2 coolers filled with bottled water and a big cooler full of ham, egg, and potato tacos for all the workers. We took a break to eat, and everyone was very grateful. Interestingly, everyone seemed to find a spot where they could see Caitlin in her fitted jeans and tank top. There wasn't much conversation while they ate and watched her greet and serve our team. After we finished, they took the empty cooler back to the house. Gato and Doc had taken the kids on a hike to overlook Cherry Creek to keep them busy while we worked. Cherry Creek runs through the canyon on the north side of the mountain. On the south side, Right Hand Creek flows through a canyon that meets my mountain at the southeast corner before heading east-southeast. Both creeks come from springs located on or near the ranch. I'm not sure where exactly because I haven't explored the canyons apart from looking at them from above. They're hard to reach by ATV and nearly impossible on horseback, and I haven't felt like trying to walk through them. Caitlin watched from the patio for a bit. She even caught attention from where we were working half a mile away, especially with the sunlight shining on her hair. We could see smoke rising from the grill, and Clay and Chap were busy moving between the house and the grill. We finished just before noon, and 19 of us walked back to the house with our hand tools, and some were carrying rifles just to be safe. The smell of wood smoke and burgers made my stomach rumble as we approached the house. Trays were stacked high with lettuce, tomatoes, onions, and cheese. When we reached the patio, the condiments we wanted were brought out from the house. Coolers filled with bottled water and sodas were opened, and Chap made a friendly gesture inviting us to dig in. Caitlin stopped everyone by saying loudly, "After we say a prayer, Clay, will you lead us?" Clay thanked the Lord for keeping us safe, for the good food, and for trustworthy friends to share it with. We all echoed his amen and then fell into line. I stepped aside after getting the remote control and looked down the road leading to the bridge. The bare patch of stone at the entrance caught my eye. It was really noticeable compared to the plants around it. Maybe I should ask someone to plant some trees and flowers there. Or perhaps I should just let nature take its course. A gentle hand rested on my shoulder and squeezed lightly. I turned to see a young woman and said, "Hi, thanks for the nice meal, but where are the kids?" They were really hungry at 11:15, so they've eaten and gone with Doc and Gatto on another adventure. They fell asleep better than we did, but I told them to come back for their naps by 1:30. Are you going to take a nap? I should, but I have questions I need to ask first. She smiled and said, Claude and Clay have been on the phone all morning. I think they can help with your questions, and then we can take a nap when the kids do. She seemed excited, but I was feeling unsure. Caitlin, I spent nearly 5 years feeling sad and angry trying to figure out what I did wrong that made me lose you and the kids. You came back into my life less than a week ago and offered me a chance to know my kids again after all this time, but now we have a serious situation to deal with. I tried to ignore the hurt in her eyes and continued. Have I enjoyed being close to you again? I think you know the answer. Lots of people here would feel the same way, so that doesn't make me unique. But let's take a moment to think. I don't know if I truly know you, the real you. I knew you when you were younger, engaged to me as my wife and as the caring mother of our kids. I thought I understood you, but now I realize I may not know you at all. Now you're back and all those qualities I liked before are pulling me in again, but I also feel unsure and mixed up. Don't look so sad. I'm not saying I want you to leave or anything. What I really want is to be with you and our kids, to get to know all of you better, and see where it goes. I want us all to live together and spend time as a family, Caitlin, but I need some space and time. I have to travel for work next week, but I'll ask some friends to stay nearby for support, and Claude will set up a safety plan, even if I think we're okay now. Can you do that for me? Can you give me some time and space to reconnect with you? Her big green eyes were looking at me closely, searching for the true meaning in my words. I saw a hint of acceptance, and she replied, I spent the last 5 years wishing I could change my past, and for 4 of those years, I've hoped we could be together again, even just as friends and co-parents. I'm sorry if I've seemed too eager, but I really can't help it. You have this charm that draws me in, she said with a smile. It's not just how you look, though, that's nice too. It's how you connect with the kids, how you treat others, the respect you get, and how calm you are during tough times. You know when to take charge, and when to follow others. When I think about all these things, I see how special you are, and I feel lucky to have you in my life no matter what type of relationship we have. Yes, I want to be close to you every night, and I want to share moments on the patio watching the sun rise or set, and I want to show you affection often, but I'll respect your wishes. I'm grateful that you even consider this, and I gladly accept. Now let's go eat. I'm really hungry, and I know you must be too. The burgers were great. The kids returned full of energy but soon fell asleep. We all took a nap, in different rooms. After a couple of hours, I woke up. It was quiet, so I let them rest. Clay and Claude were relaxing on the patio with drinks when I finally felt awake enough to join them. Where is everyone else? I asked while grabbing a drink from the cooler. Claude smiled and replied, The older folks are napping, and so are several of our team. They will switch out at 8, and we'll keep watch until we are sure everything is safe unless you have another plan. No, that sounds good. Any updates on the helicopter? That's the last concern I know about. We'll discuss your last point soon, but I haven't heard any news about the helicopter. Do you think you should check with Sheriff Goodson? I called the sheriff's personal number. He answered right away. Good afternoon, Mr. McGregor. How can I help you today? I was wondering if you had any information. I'm almost at your gate, the sheriff cut in. I have a weak signal, so send someone to open the gate, and we can finish our talk on your patio. I can unlock the gate from here. Please come on up. He must have been nearby because by the time Clay went to get us another drink, the sheriff's Jeep was parked, and he was walking up. Good afternoon, everyone. You all look so relaxed. Can you share some of that drink? We shook hands and gathered around as Claude handed him a drink. Want a cooler for that, Sheriff? He laughed and said, I've never let a drink sit long enough to warm up. After taking a long sip, he wiped his mouth and added, I'm glad to see you young folks enjoying good Texas beer, just like us older guys. Isn't it great when the best beer is the cheapest? We clinked our bottles together, toasted to our cold Lone Star beers, and enjoyed a sip. I asked, "What happened with that helicopter flying around here?" "Sounds like you guys don't catch the news much. Some pilot was flying too low through the Puertecita Mountains to the east and crashed into Mitre Peak. It must have had a lot of fuel because it made a huge noise and left a big hole. The sheriff in Reeves County said there wasn't much left of the helicopter or the people inside." "How about those F-16S we saw all good?" Clay inquired. "My buddy said they had a nice flight and got the chance to track an unknown aircraft. It didn't have any markings and wouldn't say who it was, so they kept an eye on it until it flew out of range heading east." We all laughed, raised our beers again, and Claude joked, "It sure helps to know a sheriff who has connections in high places." This led to more laughter and another toast to friends in high places. Gato, Chap, and Caitlin came outside to join us. "Before you ask," Caitlin said, "Coyote found a path down to the springs where Cherry Creek starts, and he wanted to show it to the kids and Doc. He said they won't go too far, just as far as they can on the ATV, so they will be back in about an hour." I grabbed another round of beers for the four of us and a round for the three newcomers. I returned just in time to hear Caitlin ask Clay, "So, Mr. Saguaro, what were you doing hanging out in La Kiva when things got crazy?" He smiled and replied, "I promised Rob I'd share this with him, and the sheriff should know too, so here it goes." He pointed to Claude and continued, "We only learned about the bounties just before Chap did. Even though our patron is a bit paranoid, we've come to realize that his enemies are very real. Some of his enemies are just embarrassed business people who tried to trick him, but others are more dangerous." Claude added, "For those who might not know, which is likely all of you, Rob is the one who lent us the money to start our security firm 3 years ago. Clay was still in the Army at that time, but he promised to join me after 10 years of service. I started working for Rob when he was still with his old firm, and he was sent to tough spots all over the Middle East, Africa, and the Balkans. When he left that job and went out on his own, he took on even bigger risks in those same areas, plus added places like Russia, Kazakhstan, Siberia, and Venezuela. It got too big for one person to manage, so we began working with locals in some of the more challenging locations. After trying several options that didn't work out, Rob wanted to know what it would take to find reliable full-time help. He offered to support me when I explained. That's how Ultimate Solutions started one night in a bar in Casablanca. I've only hired former U.S. military members, and our company has built a strong reputation in less than 4 years. More importantly, we have a dependable network of contacts around the world, which helps us step in before our clients can be harmed. Clay joined us last year after retiring at 29. He brought important tech knowledge that we didn't have before. We now use electronics as much as we use informants. He's the reason we found a possible deal on the dark web that might be about you, Rob. However, it's not very clear, so Clay decided to go to Big Bend to keep an eye on things. Of course, he got caught up with you and your friends and told me it was the best job he's ever had. Around the same time, we learned from one of our contacts that Escamilla was offering a reward for information on your family. Within an hour, we discovered that the reward also included you, and that Escamilla had gathered some bad people from around the world, many connected to your old friend Robert. I got a message from Claude just before Chap called you outside, but Chap had more details than we did, Clay continued. We were trying to catch up. Claude found out about the main group moving at Marathon, so we thought we had enough time. That's why I suggested we meet at Study Butte instead of going to your house. We believed the smaller group was just scouting, but you forced them to act and handled the situation. Escamilla didn't know what happened since they didn't report back to him, so he led his team right into trouble. Once they learned you and your family weren't there, they regrouped at Crescent Moon Ranch near Marfa, and we all know the outcome of that. Claude added, So, my friend, you're likely safe from what Escamilla planned, but we're not sure about other threats. We can't even be certain if there are any other threats. Caitlin had been quietly listening. Claude, Clay, does this mean we might still be at risk? What about my kids? Probably not, but we can't make any promises, Claude replied. We're still investigating and making calls, but one thing I'm unsure about, Clay interrupted. What was happening with the Escamilla brothers? We always heard that Ronaldo was the strong cartel leader, and the younger brother was more business-minded. but from your talks with him, Rob, it sounds like he took charge. Wait, Gato shouted. What do you think I am, a camel? I'm going to grab some drinks, and some of you better come help me out. The good sheriff and chap followed along. I collected the empty bottles and accepted a fresh beer before explaining. Raimundo has 2 impressive college degrees, a degree in business from Columbia and a master's in finance from Princeton. He has been using money from human and drug trafficking, along with funds from other criminal activities to make a lot of profit. He wants to steer the organization away from harmful activities like drug dealing and illegal services. His brother was focused on enhancing their involvement in those areas, while Raimundo has been trying to stop it. Don't get me wrong. There is still a big market for marijuana in states where it is illegal, like this one, and he isn't planning to give that up. But when it comes to strong opioids and harmful drugs, he's planning to step back from those. He promised that his first decisions as leader would involve leaving behind illegal activities and ending violent deals. While he remains a gangster leading a risky organization, I believe him when he says he aims to start legitimate businesses and create jobs that support local communities. We can hope for the best. Additionally, he was Maria Elena's first love. Ronaldo forced her to marry him while Raimundo was at school, and they have 1 child together. However, the other 2 children are actually Raimundo's. Maria Elena's mother was taken from her village by the older Escamilla, the brother's father, who was the worst of the lot. She is happy that Raimundo is now in charge and believes in his plans. Regarding our agreement, I met Ronaldo and then Raimundo while working with the Mexican government on a joint project. Ronaldo wanted more money for ensuring our safety in their territory than I was willing to pay. I met with Raimundo, and we agreed to connect some very profitable work to their legitimate businesses, allowing the project to move forward. From that point, I grew friendly with Raimundo, but Ronaldo disliked me. We have a much bigger project coming up, and I had been planning with Raimundo to ensure everything goes smoothly. He was already working to take over from Ronaldo in the organization and the family when I approached him with another plan. This plan could put him in charge of the organization and closer to Maria Elena, while also sending his competitor to prison alongside his old business partner, Robert. It was a risky plan, but it could have solved multiple problems at once. Unfortunately, we never had the chance to carry it out. Robert and Ronaldo took care of that for us. There is one more advantage for me. With Ronaldo out of the picture, Robert's ties to him are also finished. Now Mr. Robert Cawthorn Jr. is about to learn what it really means to be locked up in a high-security federal prison. Sure, he could still inform on his friends in the Middle East and Eastern Europe. Maybe the authorities will move him to the Witness Protection Program in exchange, but we all know that program has its problems. With Ronaldo Escamilla out of the picture, Junior's future doesn't look too promising. I'll drink to that, Claude said, raising his bottle for a toast. We clinked our bottles together and Caitlin joined us, smiling brightly. She seemed to have some hard feelings about her former partner. Maybe he shouldn't have treated her or her kids that way. The sun was rising in the northeast as mid-April neared. I noticed this when it shone directly into my eyes the next morning. After taking care of last night's drinks, I showered, shaved, got dressed, and headed to the kitchen. Suddenly, I was tackled by 2 little whirlwinds as I tried to reach the coffee pot. They were excitedly sharing plans they made with Uncle Doc and Uncle Coyote, who brought me a cup of coffee since I was still waking up. They told me about the springs that feed Cherry Creek, hidden by trees, but they found a way to get there. They announced that we would all go explore it that morning and clean up some of the brush and tall grass, too. I set my coffee on the table and took a seat. Then, I lifted my kids onto my legs so they could share their plans while I sipped coffee, trying to wake up. It turns out we also have reservations for a star party on Friday night at McDonald Observatory, a visit to Fort Davis and the Chihuahuan Desert Research Center tomorrow, and a swimming trip at Balmorhea State Park when it gets warm enough. Don't forget about the Marfa lights, Uncle Doc reminded us. This led to a 5-minute retelling of Doc's stories about the mysterious lights. According to him, sometimes the lights show up to play, but you have to be quiet and go at the right times for the best chance to see them. Their mom came into the room, watched the kids on my lap for a moment, then leaned over to give them each a kiss before accepting the cup of coffee Uncle Coyote offered. She sat down, enjoying their joyful chatter with a smile. Caitlin must have known about our upcoming trip to Cherry Creek because she wore jeans, lace-up boots, and a long-sleeve denim shirt. It was a look I hadn't seen on her before, but it suited her well. No one felt like cooking, but everyone was hungry. So we pulled out some of Maria's leftover breakfast tacos from the fridge and heated them up. Not as good as when fresh, but with your choice of red salsa or green salsa, they were just fine. Clay and Claude stayed to gather information and check with their tech experts about rumors of someone wanting to harm me. With Ronaldo Escamilla gone, it was tempting to relax. But the reason Clay was sent undercover was still important. They needed to find out if the threat was real or not. I admired their determination and felt proud to have them on my side. The 8 of us loaded 2 of the 4-person Kawasaki mules with saws, trimmers, fuel, machetes, and axes. We moved down and around the mountain until we got as close as possible to the springs. Chap and Coyote found a path and cleared it a bit with their machetes. The kids followed them, and we followed the kids with the tools. The springs were amazing. Hidden and hard to reach because of thick trees, bushes, rocks, and grass, the water flowed strongly from the base of a steep limestone cliff. The cliff was over 200 feet high, and large boulders surrounded the spring, protecting it. The west side, where we approached, was filled with small and large cottonwood trees mixed with juniper, scrub oak, piñon pine, and Mexican buckeye. The best part was a couple of 30-foot-high silverleaf oaks a few hundred feet downstream. I had seen the tops of the tall trees while looking down from the mountain, but I didn't recognize them as silverleafs because I could only see the green tops. From the creek bed, though, the silver undersides of their leaves stood out, shimmering in the breeze like the leaves of quaking aspen trees. Grace saw me standing there and asked, "What do you see, Daddy?" "Come here beside me and I'll show you." That made Doss, Caitlin, and the others gather around me by the stream. I named this place the Silverleaf Oak Ranch because silverleaf oaks are rare in Texas, but I found 3 groves behind the house. They are mostly 810 feet high, and I didn't know there were any others along the creek, especially 2 that are at least 30 feet tall. "Can you guess why they are called silverleaf?" She and Doss shouted the answer at the same time. "Because their leaves look silver." They wanted to run through the grass to see them up close, but I reminded them that snakes needed water too, and Cherry Creek probably attracted many kinds of snakes, including some that could be dangerous like cottonmouths, western diamondback rattlesnakes, and prairie rattlers. That made everyone less excited, so they started looking around their feet more closely, which was a good idea. After checking out the area, we decided to create one path in and out, winding it enough that no one could easily follow our trail or see the springs from the start. There was already a winding deer path there, so we just cleared some brush and grass so we could walk in a line. We also expanded the spot I was in earlier so everyone could stand or sit comfortably, and we built a small fire pit using some rocks to form the sides. Cherry Creek flows northeast between 2 mountains. The water was clear, and we could see small fish swimming around. It might not have been perfect for fishing, but it was a nice place to relax, cook hot dogs, and roast marshmallows. Using the machetes and a trimmer, we made a trail through the tall grass and bushes. The path led us downstream to some big silverleaf oaks, where we found a great spot to sit under the shade by the stream. After building another small fire pit with high sides to keep the fire safe, we decided to explore a bit more downstream. The people with machetes were leading the way, and we did see some snakes, which reminded us to be careful. We came across a diamondback snake resting on the path, and it was making noise, warning us to stay away. We stood quietly in a line, waiting for it to move, but it didn't. Doc then used a knife to cut a 5-foot cottonwood branch that split into a Y at one end. He trimmed it down and carefully prodded the snake with it. When the snake struck, Doc used the Y to keep it still and showed the kids the features of that snake, teaching them about how to recognize dangerous ones. Not far ahead, we spotted a long water snake basking in the sun, and Doc pointed out what made it different from the diamondback. After a little while, Coyote suggested we take a break in a small grove of scrub oak. We stood still and quiet, taking in the valley. Suddenly, the sounds of many birds singing filled the air. It was surprising since I hadn't noticed them before. Just as Coyote had said, we soon saw some animals appear, including a deer with its fawn, a rabbit, and a possum that Chap pointed out in a nearby tree. Coyote took this chance to teach the kids that being quiet and still helps you see and hear more, and that it works with people too. As I focused on everything around me, I caught a hint of the light scent Caitlin wore. She was standing next to me, looking down at a small group of deer drinking from the river. They didn't notice us nearby. She watched them with amazement, and I watched her with the same feeling. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, revealing her lovely neck and small features. Without makeup, her skin looked bright and smooth in the soft sunlight. She wore a loose denim shirt and jeans that fit her well in all the right places. In my eyes, she was truly beautiful. I continued to watch until she felt my gaze and turned to me, tilting her head, and asked, "What?" I smiled and looked away. She took my arm and whispered, "I love this place." We stayed there until the kids started to complain about being hungry. On our way back, I thought about restaurants in Fort Davis or Marfa, knowing we hadn't decided where to eat. To our surprise and delight, Maria arrived in the morning, tidied up a bit, and made a taco bar with my serving dishes. Clay, Claude, and some of our security team who had finished their shifts had already eaten, so the kids grabbed plates piled high with Spanish rice, beans, and tacos filled with beef or shredded chicken. They could choose water, Dr. Pepper, or RC Cola to drink. After we finished eating and talked about how full we were, she brought out a platter of fresh buñuelos. Somehow we managed to save enough space for a couple each. Grace and Doss admitted they needed a nap, so they kissed me goodbye, and I watched as Caitlin took them to their rooms. She looked great in her work clothes as she walked down the hall. "Still not getting it, huh?" Chap asked. I looked at him, raising my hands in confusion. He shook his head. "What?" I replied, feeling a bit frustrated. "When are you going to realize that what happened before doesn't matter now?" he said. "She loves you," he added with a shrug. "So what's stopping you from accepting that?" "Maybe it's what she did 5 years ago?" I answered, feeling more annoyed. "Maybe it's because I don't trust her? Maybe I'm still upset that she kept things from me for months before being honest? There are many reasons, you know." Coyote joined in. "Are you thinking about moving back and trying to fit in with the country club people? Because they would definitely judge you even if you got back at Robert. Out here in West Texas, we don't care about those things. Everyone makes mistakes, people like us. If you get through it, you learn, grow stronger, and keep moving forward. You can't go back and change the past or the future. You can only make the most of today. Listen, Rob, I messed up a lot. I lost my fortunes, pushed my friends away, and found out my wife, who doesn't smoke, has lung cancer. It might be because of the pollution from my factories that I had to be close to while starting them up. Do you think I wouldn't want to change all that? But I couldn't, so I accepted what happened, brought my wife to this place where she could see the stars at night and breathe fresh air, and laid her to rest where she wished, under the big cottonwood tree by the creek on our ranch. Now, I'm here with good friends, and I feel calm about my past. Your past isn't as complicated as mine. You weren't the one who made bad choices like I did. You were hurt by people you loved, while trying to be the father and husband they needed. The issue is, they were misled and hurt by the same person you were. For sure, you got what you wanted from the person who wronged you. He's in jail now and probably will be for a long time, so he's out of the picture unless you want to pay someone to give him a hard time in there. The people still in your life are Doze, Grace, and Caitlin. It's clear how much you care for your kids, and you've done well to forgive them, which is truly the right choice. But what about Caitlin? She brought you and your kids a lot of pain. Do you need to get back at her? Or has she spent enough time feeling sorry for what happened over the last 4 years? If you think she's not being honest and you can't trust her, that's an easy choice, right? But if you believe her words now and think her actions show she really means it, you have a tougher decision to make and some weight to lift off your shoulders. I stood up, made a gesture at Coyote and Chap, then turned to Toro and Gatto. Do either of you want to say anything? They both raised their hands and shook their heads, as if worried I might react to them too. Fine, I'll go check on Claude. As I walked away, I heard Gatto say loudly, That guy can't handle the truth. He turns and hides. Claude was talking on the phone, and Clay was busy with someone online. I caught their attention and raised my hands to ask, Any news? They both shook their heads, and Claude leaned closer, saying quietly, I think we're all set. Go take your family out for some fun. We'll keep an eye on things just in case. I walked back to the group and asked, "Is anything happening around Marfa or Alpine? I'm thinking of taking the kids for a treat at the drugstore and then doing something fun." Doc smiled and said, "I know something they might like, but you'll have to let us join you. We want a shake, and we want to see the show too." "All right, we'll take the Denali XL, but let Claude know where we are going. He wants to send a team just in case." The kids were waking up, but the idea of a shake or sundae got them moving quickly. Their mother had already showered and was in her closet looking at her clothes when I walked in. Seeing Caitlin in a pretty matching set made me pause. It was hard not to notice how nice she looked. She didn't seem to know I was there, so I took a moment to admire her quietly. I had seen her without clothes before, and I knew her figure was lovely. Watching her move as she reached for something on a rack was enjoyable in a different way. She stood on her toes to grab a floral dress. I watched how her muscles shaped her legs, and I couldn't help but appreciate how fit she looked. Caitlin was about 5'6" with soft curves and strong legs. Her hair was naturally wavy and a lovely shade of honey blonde. Loving her had been overwhelming 5 years ago, but I couldn't deny that if I could design the perfect person, she would look almost like Caitlin. She picked up a dress and held it in front of her, studying it carefully. I watched as she smiled at her reflection in the mirror. My eyes were drawn to her figure, but I admired her confidence. The dress was nice, and it fit her well as she checked herself in the mirror. When she finally noticed me looking, her sparkling green eyes met mine. "So, do you think this little dress will be okay for whatever you have planned this afternoon, Rob?" she asked with a playful smile. I was momentarily speechless. I stood there trying to find the right words to answer her simple question. Her smile widened as she turned to face me directly, still wearing the dress. "Rob, do you think this dress will be all right for today? If you don't like it, I can try on something else for you." It was too late for me to adjust myself, but I attempted anyway, which only made her smile grow wider, showing off her bright white teeth. "Rob?" she asked, knowing exactly what was going on. With a deep sigh, I replied, "That dress will be just fine, Caitlin. Can you be ready in 15 minutes? "I'll be ready in 10, she said cheerfully. Then she paused, held the dress next to her, and asked, "Unless you have something else in mind." I quickly turned and left, hoping to calm myself down before reaching the others. I decided to stop at the bathroom first. The kids were in the back seat. Doc sat in the front passenger seat, and I was driving the Yukon Denali XL parked in the driveway when Princess Caitlin finally joined us 15 minutes later. Although the green floral dress she had tried on in the closet was nice, she was wearing something different. The dress she chose was white with roses stitched on it. It fit loosely and ended just above her knees. On most people, it would seem modest, but on Caitlin, it was quite revealing. While it hung loosely, it still shaped itself to her body as she moved. The dress had off-the-shoulder sleeves, which highlighted her lovely shoulders and neck. Her legs showed just above her knees, and her sandals had straps around her ankles. The way the dress fit made it hard not to notice her figure. With all this to see, it was easy to forget the beauty of her face and her messy honey-colored hair as she walked by me to get into the driver's seat. "Do I look okay? You never told me where we are going," she asked. I quickly snapped back to reality and pointed toward the patio, where Clay, Claude, and 4 other men were waiting quietly, watching her. When she looked at them, I said, "What do you think?" She giggled, sat down in her seat, pulled her dress down a bit, turned her legs, and slid over toward the middle of the bench seat. Caitlin then greeted the 4 men, thanking them for being patient and for waiting. Gato winked at her and said, "Oh, believe me, we've enjoyed this." Doc looked at her when she turned back and whispered something. She giggled, glanced at me, then smiled as I started driving down the mesa toward the highway. "Did you pick this outfit because it matched your favorite color?" I whispered. "How did you know?" she whispered back, playfully pinching my leg. As we left the gate and got on TX 166, Doc started sharing facts about Sawtooth Mountain, which was to the northwest, then talked about Mount Livermore and Baldy Peak as we passed them on the way to town. Just before we turned east, Doc pointed out the Sierra Viejo Mountains along the Rio Grande in the distance and said, "When we turn, you'll see the Portacita Mountains and Meter Peak over to the east." The kids listened closely and asked good questions. Doc was pleased with their curiosity. He mentioned how bright and clever he thought they were, and how those traits should be encouraged and developed. This made me think as I drove towards town, if they stayed with me, where would they go to school? What could we do as parents to help them learn? What if they moved back to Houston? That thought was a bit unsettling. The Jeff Davis Courthouse and the Olympia Hotel brought more history lessons from the locals before I parked at the Fort Davis drugstore and hotel. We waited outside for our security team to catch up with us before heading inside. They were dressed like the locals in jeans and t-shirts, but they still attracted attention because it's not every day you see 4 men looking so fit and alert. The soda fountain was a new experience for Caitlin, Doss, and Grace. We came for the floats and shakes, but the burgers smelled so delicious that we each had one and shared baskets of sweet potato fries and onion rings. To top it all off, we enjoyed sundaes made with Bluebell ice cream. Full, we decided to stroll around the little town to help our food settle. The security team spread out, but I could spot them every now and then as we walked through the town of about 1,200 people. After Gatto talked about the July 4th activities at the courthouse square, the kids hurried up the steps and walked inside. Caitlin put her hands on her hips and said, "We're not at La Kiva anymore, and I'm tired of using your Humano names. What are your real names?" El Gato laughed, and they all looked a bit shy. "Yes, ma'am, you're right. Let me introduce myself first. My given name is Ronald Dalton, but my friends call me Ron. In a previous chapter of my life, I worked in commercial development in the Dallas-Fort Worth area." He turned to El Chaparral, who bowed and said, "Carlos Alemán Montoya at your service, Miss Caitlin. I come from Monterrey, a city in Mexico where I dealt with logistics, moving products across Mexico and into the United States and Canada. I met many great business people along the way, but I also became aware of the darker sides of both Mexican and American society. As you might guess, those connections have been useful at times." El Coyote introduced himself as Christopher "Chris" Hayes, Jr., a former oil businessman from Houston and a proud resident of Terlingua for the last 8 years. El Toro smiled kindly at her and said, "You know, I'm a retired professor from Sul Ross in Alpine, now a professor emeritus, and I go by Doc because I hold a PhD in geology. My real name is Brian Wilder. I was married to my wonderful wife Betsy for 40 years before we lost her to cancer 8 years ago. She was an elementary teacher, and we didn't have children of our own, just the many we taught. Chris was also fortunate to be married for nearly 40 years to a woman who was truly amazing. She passed away from lung cancer about 5 years ago. They had one son, a Marine who sadly died overseas. Ron lost his wife after 28 years of marriage, along with their only child, in a car accident nearly 12 years ago. Carlos unfortunately lost his wife and 3 kids to a tragic incident meant for him. He still feels the pain of that loss 10 years later, and his anger towards those responsible runs deep. So that gives you a brief picture of us. It might be more than you wanted to hear, but it helps explain the care we feel for you and your dear children." A range of emotions crossed Caitlin's face as each of them introduced themselves. She looked troubled by the stories of loss. Tears slowly rolled down her cheeks as she straightened herself, wiped away her tears, and said, "I'm Caitlin Ann Sterling, and it's a pleasure to meet all of you. I was once married to the man I loved deeply, but I lost him because of my own mistakes. He left me with 2 wonderful children, and it would be a joy to share them with you. You've already taught them so much, and I truly hope we can stay here and continue to grow our friendships." I must admit, even though I knew their stories, I felt emotional when Doc spoke of their losses. I had just managed to dry my eyes when Caitlin finished her introduction, and 4 pairs of eyes turned toward me. I understood what they were looking for, but wasn't ready to share. So I said, "I also hope Caitlin, Doss, and Grace will remain in the area. I think they know they can always count on me." 5 heads nodded, then turned to the stairs as our daughter and son rushed down. They said Sheriff Goodson wanted us to come inside. That gave me a short break, but I realized that hearing their stories and Caitlin's thoughts pushed me to think more deeply. Whatever was next would have to wait. I needed time to think before making a choice. Sheriff Goodson welcomed us warmly and gave us a tour of the historic courthouse, built in 1910 and nicely restored in 2003. He even let the kids climb up to the clock tower to see the gears and the bell that rang every hour. The tower has clocks on all sides, so someone has to keep them running well, or you'd see different times depending on your direction. Luckily, a retired clockmaker in Fort Davis takes care of them. After the tour, Sheriff Goodson took us into the district courtroom and shared interesting stories about the history of Fort Davis and the nearby cavalry post, which has been slowly restored since the 1970s. As he talked about the brave Buffalo Soldiers and the clever Mescalero Apache and Comanche who were once there, we all looked forward to visiting the post. We were running out of things to do in town and it was getting late, so I suggested we take the scenic route back to the ranch. When I mentioned how long it would take, Caitlin said we should bring food because the kids would be hungry before we got home. Ron suggested we buy supplies at the grocery store, have a meal at the rest area in Madera Canyon, and then take a short hike to learn about the unique trees and plants at this high elevation. The grocery store even had picnic baskets for sale, so we got everything we needed. From Fort Davis, we headed north on TX 118, passing the entrance to Davis Mountain State Park, with Mounts Locke and Fowlkes on the other side. After watching the beautiful buildings for more than 10 minutes, we reached the entrance to the McDonald Observatory, where we planned to attend a stargazing event in 2 days. The kids were so curious about its unusual look that they wanted to visit right away. As we drove further into the Texas Alps, we climbed higher and noticed different plants. We saw several kinds of pine trees, including ponderosa and longleaf, along with some blue spruce, as we approached the elevation of 6,700 feet, which makes this the highest highway in Texas. We decided to take the easy 4-mile hike before eating and appreciated the signs that showed the different plants along the way. We also saw black-tailed deer, rabbits, a raccoon, and many birds, but we were all hungry when we returned to the Frank Woodward rest area. The 4 members of our security team walked with us and ate alongside us. There was little chance of danger since we were the only ones around. Looking back, we let our guard down. The remote location, the quietness, and the easygoing atmosphere had made us feel relaxed all day. When a nice-looking Class C motorhome pulled in and parked far from us, we didn't think much of it. A small couple stepped out, stretched, and started to prepare a meal at a table. Even our guards seemed at ease. The restrooms were between us and the RV, so Caitlin and Juan, one of our security members, took Doss and Grace to wash up after our meal. The rest of us gathered our trash and loaded the leftovers into the Suburban. Once the RV started to leave with their meal still on the table, we began searching for Caitlin, Doss, Grace, and Juan. I called for them, but there was no reply. I hurried to the restroom just before Abel, Randy, and Wayne arrived, running with their weapons ready. We found Juan unconscious outside the restroom. He had been hurt, but was still alive. Caitlin and the children were missing. I grabbed Juan's weapon, called for Chap and Coyote to bring the Suburban and Denali XL, and told Randy and Wayne to take Juan to get help while I asked Abel to follow me. After seeing the RV head north, knowing there were steep hills and sharp turns ahead, I ran downhill and then along a dry creek, hoping to reach it before it got past the hills. Abel was right behind me, and I gave instructions as we ran. The shortcut brought us to the road just in time as the RV passed by. We separated, hid behind trees, and aimed at the tires as it drove in front of us. I shot twice at the front tire, then 4 times at the engine area. Abel shot twice at the outside rear tire, and then at the inside tire. The engine stopped and the RV came to a halt. We heard the transmission shift and the brakes engage. I moved to the road and the side of the RV while Abel went to the back. Juan's weapon was well-equipped, and I figured Abel's was similar, so we were set. The RV couldn't drive in this area anymore. However, we couldn't see anything through the tinted windows, and they had taken hostages. The problem with the tinted window was taken care of when a shot was fired through it from inside. The sound of a bullet flew past my head and hit a tree. I was getting close to the RV when I spotted someone aiming a gun out the window at me. I shot twice, not worried about hitting my family inside because I was positioned at such an angle that any misses would go harmlessly into the roof. I didn't miss. The gun went tumbling onto the road and I heard someone fall. A woman shouted for us to stop or they would hurt the hostages. I noticed Abel diving underneath the back of the RV. I crouched by the passenger door, low enough so any bullets fired would pass over my head. I checked the door and found it unlocked. I opened it a bit and peeked inside. I saw people looking out the windows on both sides of the living area. My family stood against the back wall with their hands up, while a small woman knelt on the floor, pointing a gun at them. I heard shouting from a back room in another language. Then I realized the man nearest to me was Asian, and that all the kidnappers were too. I aimed at the kneeling woman, who yelled in English that she would hurt the hostages if we kept firing. I had to be careful because if I missed, the bullet could hit Caitlin. The man was still watching from the window when he suddenly turned and shot at me, missing my hand by inches. I fired at him, hitting him twice in the chest. He fell, and his two partners turned towards him, giving me a chance to aim at the woman. I hoped my shot wouldn't harm Caitlin, and I fired. She was knocked sideways and fell at Caitlin's feet. Caitlin looked down, but seemed okay. Then the other man fired into the chair nearby, hitting me once in the shoulder and again in my ribs. I felt the pain, but didn't stop. I moved quickly between the front seats and spotted him. Before he could aim again, I shot twice at him, and he fell, his gun sliding across the room to the wall near Caitlin. I turned my attention to the bedroom door, hearing more shots inside and from outside. I looked at Caitlin and my children, signaled for them to get down, and went back to watching the door next to them. The longer I lay there, the more dizzy I felt, but I knew I had to stop the last kidnapper before he could hurt my family. Suddenly, he came through the doorway, pointing a big gun at me. I shot at him but missed. He aimed his gun at me. I fired again, and then I heard several quick shots. Through the growing fog in my mind, I saw him collapse, turning away from my family. It seems I lost track of the next few days. I don't recall our old friends in security taking down a group of North Koreans coming to help the kidnappers or being rushed back toward Fort Davis. I don't remember the air ambulance picking up Juan and me at a spot on a small mountain or flying to Midland Memorial Hospital. The first thing I remember is feeling soft lips on my forehead and then seeing a kind face pull away slowly. When she noticed I was awake, she cried out and people hurried into the room. Next, I remember her sitting beside me, holding my hand, eyes closed, praying softly. "Angel," I whispered, "are you praying for me?" This time she didn't cry out, but instead called for a nurse before standing and gently kissing my lips below the oxygen tube in my nose. People in lavender scrubs rushed in, made her move, and started checking the machines above my bed. Eventually, a man came in, introduced himself as Dr. Wang, and told me he was the surgeon who had operated on me. He was glad to see me awake. I stayed quiet as he examined me, then asked if I had any questions. "About 1,000,000, Dr. Wang. Let's start with where am I and how did I get here?" He chuckled and said I would get my answers soon, but the first ones were simple. "You're in the ICU at Midland Memorial Hospital. You were brought here 4 days ago after getting 2 gunshot wounds in what the media is calling the gun battle in the Texas Alps. Before you ask, Juan de Leon is doing well and will be released tomorrow. Your family and your friend who were with you were not hurt, although they played a big part in that gun battle. I'm sure they all want to see you and share their stories, but you need to get a bit stronger first." He looked at the kind woman sitting watchfully in her chair and smiled. "I've sent her away at least 100 times these past few days, but she always comes back as soon as I leave. I know she's not family, but do you want her to stay? The first time I woke up, I thought she was an angel. Who am I to tell an angel no?" I turned to the angel and asked, "Where are the children?" "Our friends took them for breakfast at 8, so they should be back in the waiting area by now. They would love to see you if Dr. Wang will let them." "Please, Doc? Seeing them would help me feel better." He chuckled, shook his head, and said, "If I let them in, how long until the rest want to come in too? How will you rest with so many people around?" Then he grinned at me, nodded, and said, "I'll let you see your children and friends for 1 hour, but only if you make your angel here leave with them and stay away until visiting hours at 5. Can you do that?" "You'll have to ask the angel about that. I've never been good at telling her what to do, but I can try. I will make the others leave and I will rest until 5. He nodded to the nurse, who smiled at me and quickly left the room. "Dr. Wang, I do have one thing I want to ask you. Why don't I feel worse after being shot twice? I'm tired, but I don't hurt nearly as much as I did before. I'm told that the bullets went through a padded chair before hitting you, so they weren't very fast. There wasn't much damage to your muscles, but it bled a lot before the EMTs could stop it. The bullet stuck between your ribs came out when you were moved into the ambulance, and that one bled a lot too. You had to have a few blood transfusions, but once we closed your wounds, we felt hopeful. You are very lucky, Mr. McGregor. If it had taken longer to get you here. Suddenly, I heard the sound of children running in the hall, and my kids rushed into the room. They stopped when they saw me. "Daddy?" Doss asked carefully. "Can we come to you?" Grace looked at her mom and then at the doctor, who smiled at her. "Yes, you can go to his bed, but remember he's hurt, so be gentle." He smiled at me and left, moving through the group in the doorway. Grace and Doss approached cautiously, almost shyly. I raised my right arm and said, "Come around to this side so I can hug both of you." They broke into huge smiles, ran around to my side, and jumped into my arms. Doss was squeezed between his sister and me, but he didn't mind at all. His arm was across my chest, his head rested on my shoulder, and Grace leaned over to kiss my cheek. She began telling me how much they loved me and how scared they were when they saw me hurt after I protected everyone. My son added, "Dad, you were like a hero. You shot that guy through the window, quietly opened the door, and stopped the man who shot at you, and then the mean woman who said she would hurt us. Then you shot the other man in the room, and the one who came out from the back. Well, Mommy shot him too, but you shot him first." "Your mommy shot a man?" I asked, struggling to imagine Caitlin holding a gun, let alone using it. Gracie proudly replied, "Mom shot him a lot, I think, when he pointed the big gun at you." I glanced at Caitlin, who still looked at me with warmth. Then I looked toward the door where the Humanos stood, smiling. "Really?" I asked. Ron laughed. "Yep, she did, and then made sure the others were safe. We were a little busy with their friends, but we had better tools in your Denali, and they didn't last long. Abel said he ran to the front, checked inside the RV, and saw Caitlin looking after your wounds with the kids watching her closely. He said she calmly told him that the woman and two of the men were gone, and she had taken the weapons from the two who were still alive. She pointed to a pile of guns next to her and told him to check on them, because she was worried you would lose too much blood if she didn't stop it. I'm telling you, son, she is someone you want by your side. She was calm and focused all the way until they took you away in the helicopter." I looked at her. She seemed calm, but I saw her lip trembling. "Come here," I said, and she walked to the bed, placed her hand on my cheek. "So you were my brave girl? You saved me from the bad man and helped stop my bleeding? Is that right?" Her lip quiver grew stronger, her eyes became watery, and then she leaned over, supporting herself with her hand on my shoulder, saying, "I wasn't brave, I was scared. I was worried for our kids, for myself, and for you." Then she started to cry hard, resting her chin on my forehead. The kids started to tear up too, and soon I was joined by tears. I let them cry, shedding a few tears of my own. After a little while, the kids' sobs turned into sniffles, but Caitlin kept crying. I moved my arm from underneath Doss and wrapped it around his mom. "Caitlin, can you stop crying just long enough to give me a kiss? I really need a kiss from my brave girl." Her sobs slowly quieted. I asked, "Can I have that kiss now, Angel?" She looked at me with swollen red eyes, wiped her nose with her sleeve, and with a struggle tried to smile at me. "Are you really sure you want someone who looks like this to kiss you?" "Of course I want the bravest and most beautiful girl in the world to kiss me," I said, pulling her closer. She leaned down, her lips shaking a little, and softly kissed me. Just as she tried to pull away, I held her there and said, "That's not the kiss I wanted. Try again." A smile appeared on her face, making her look even prettier. She leaned down again and gave me a real kiss. It was sweet and warm, and I could feel her interest. "I'm feeling a bit tired now. How about everyone else goes back to their rooms and lets Caitlin stay here with me for a while?" I asked, grinning. "Because we don't want you to hurt yourself more," Carlos answered with a big smile. Chris joked, "The doctor said you need rest, not more activity. We'll take her with us and come back around 5. They came back at 5, all together, and brought Clay and Claude along. Caitlin kissed me on the forehead and took a seat beside Clay. Grace and Doss settled in on my other side, and I put my arm around them. I felt better, and I think it showed because everyone seemed less worried than earlier. The brothers moved close to my bed to share their relief that I was alive and getting better. After I thanked them for coming, They stepped back into the larger group by the door. The chatting was light for the hour they stayed, and they all promised to come back tomorrow. I asked about Juan, and they told me he would be released the next day, mostly because his Kevlar vest had protected him from one of the bullets that could have been deadly. After a late supper, I thought about how Caitlin's attitude had changed. When I was very ill, she wouldn't leave my side, but now, at least tonight, she seemed a bit distant. I hadn't done anything to push her away while lying in the hospital, so I figured something must have happened during the day, or she had thought she wasn't ready to share. I slept deeply, thanks to something my favorite nurse put in my IV. I woke up early, feeling ready to go until I tried to lift my left arm. It hurt a lot. My favorite nurse was still working. She heard the noise and my loud complaints and came in with a knowing smile. "What's wrong, Mr. McGregor? You didn't try to lift your arm, did you?" "Of course not, Lakeisha. I must have moved the wrong way," I answered through clenched teeth. "Just a reminder, Mr. McGregor. Your muscles and ribs won't like it if you lift that arm, so try to keep it still." With a playful grin, she added, "Or I might have to tie it down." Okay, I'll stay still. But how much longer will I have to keep this catheter? Until your wounds heal and you can get out of bed? Why? Is it bothering you? She asked this with a sly grin. I replied, "I can manage on my own. How about we remove it and I'll show you I can handle it?" She laughed, said she would check with the doctor, winked at me, and wondered why I wanted it out so badly when I didn't even need to get up. I told her it was embarrassing and uncomfortable, and I would really appreciate whoever took it out. She chuckled and left. A few minutes later, she returned with a little pump, deflated the bladder, and removed the tube. I held my breath and clenched my teeth while it was taken out. I let out a big sigh of relief when it finally came out. Even though she was a tall, strong woman, she giggled like a young girl, shook her head, hung my bottle on the rail next to me, and took away the long tube. My breakfast came shortly after, and I sat up to eat, though it was a bit tricky with one hand. The coffee wasn't great, but at least it was coffee, and I finished the pot. Of course, that made me need to go again, which was a little uncomfortable, but also felt freeing. When stuck in a hospital bed, small wins feel huge. As promised, my family arrived when visiting hours began at 9 a.m. Many doctors, nurses, and staff had been in and out of my room since early morning, and Doctors Wang and Lopez brought good news, which made me feel great. But then I noticed Caitlin was missing. The kids were there, though, excitedly sharing stories about the movie they saw after leaving, and how they went to eat and play games with Uncle Clay and Mommy at Mr. Gaddy's before going back to the hotel to sleep. I looked around and noticed Claude was there, but not Clay. The feeling that stirred inside me was not due to my arm or ribs. Doc was sitting in Caitlin's chair. Once the kids had finished talking, he started asking me about the documents I shared with the FBI after leaving Robert's company. When I mentioned the Winslow Group, Claude stepped forward. "What about the Winslow Group?" he asked. "What information did you have?" "While I was in South America working on an oil deal, I discovered a plan to transport oil by tanker to a certain location and then illegally transfer it to another tanker. I suspected it was an attempt to bypass an embargo or trade ban, so I informed the FBI. Why do you want to know?" They exchanged glances, and then Claude said, "We're still gathering information. The kidnappers were North Koreans who came to the U.S. on vacation with South Korean passports. We believe you might have been their target, but we aren't sure why. Think about anything you might know that you haven't told the police while you rest, and let me know if you remember anything that could help." Soon after, my nurse came in to check my vitals and frowned at my visitors. "Are you all leaving soon? He needs to rest." That made everyone leave, and I never got to ask where Caitlin and Clay were. The discomfort returned, so I lay there and focused on the pain until I slowly drifted off to sleep. I woke up a short while later to find my golden-haired friend back. Clay was with her. "We brought you real coffee from Far West Coffee Company," Clay said. "The coffee here is terrible, so we got you a nice dark roast. You're going to enjoy it." I did enjoy it, and appreciated the sweet kiss Caitlin gave me on my forehead. She smiled and took a seat while Clay sat right next to her. They chatted about the coffee shop and were excited about something called horchata, or at least that's how it sounded. They looked comfortable together, but then my discomfort returned, causing the monitor to beep. Nurse Taylor came in, checked the monitor, and frowned at my guests. "What's going on to make your monitor go off, Mr. McGregor?" she asked, giving a stern look at Caitlin and Clay. I started to explain that nothing happened when they jumped up, apologized, and rushed out the door without even saying goodbye. The discomfort grew stronger, and I glared at the nurse. She glared back and injected something into my IV. I quickly fell asleep again, this time filled with vivid dreams about Caitlin, Robert, and Clay. I was glad to wake up for lunch. After eating, I felt better. Being stubborn, I tried to move my left arm. It hurt a lot, but at least it didn't feel like a 10 on the pain scale. That was progress. "When is my doctor coming in today?" I asked Nurse Taylor, who seemed a bit impatient. "As it says on your whiteboard, Mr. McGregor, he's scheduled for 3 p.m., she replied. "What about Dr. Lopez? He isn't listed," I said, matching her tone. "He isn't set to see you, but he's making rounds now. Would you like me to ask him to stop by?" Since her response was polite, I replied, "Please do." Dr. Lopez, the neurologist, came in around 2 p.m. I asked him about my condition. He said my surgeon would have more information, but after examining my wounds, he noted they were healing well and that some gentle physical therapy could be coming up for me. From a medical point of view, I don't see any serious problems from the injuries. With gunshot wounds, we worry about various effects, but the shoulder injury is fairly simple. The bullet went through without harming any important tissue, so your shoulder and neck should heal in time as the muscles recover. The injury to your rib cage was more complicated, and there was some concern about a quick infection. But it looks like the infection is now under control. There are no signs of serious issues. I'll check in with Dr. Wang before he comes by, but I think you won't need much more help from me. I waited anxiously until Wang arrived, about 15 minutes late. Once he finished checking me, I asked him what he thought. "We're planning to move you from the intensive care unit to the recovery floor later today if the blood tests from this morning show that the infection is under control. I know you're eager to get better, but we need to take it step by step. Just 5 days ago, we were doing everything we could to keep you alive." The recovery floor was quieter than the ICU, and the nurses were friendly and helpful. My family arrived at 5 and was shown upstairs. The kids rushed in first, heading right to my side to give hugs and kisses. They then gave me updates about their day, which included a shopping trip to get more clothes since they only had 2 sets each when they got here. Caitlin was the only name mentioned in connection with shopping, but I also found out they had lunch with Uncle Clay and Uncle Claude before heading to Midland Mall. After shopping, they played in a park near the hospital until it was time to visit me. I was so happy to see them and asked if they liked my new room. They said it was nicer, and the workers here were friendlier than downstairs. They also enjoyed the elevator ride. Doss mentioned that the mall had an escalator that was tricky to use. Grace pointed out the window, excitedly talking about a big building outside. I looked around. Mommy and Uncle Clay may have told them it was time to visit Daddy, but they weren't here, nor was Claude. Chris, Ron, Carlos, and Brian stepped forward to chat with me while the kids looked out the window. After exchanging polite hellos, Brian asked, "Have you thought of anything that might help explain the attack?" "No, not really. I've been busy with tests and doctors, so I haven't had much time to think. Did Claude find out anything?" "I don't know. We haven't seen much of either brother today." "The kids said they had lunch and went shopping with Uncle Clay, Uncle Claude, and Mommy." Brian looked toward the end of the bed at Chris, who shrugged. "I'm not sure. Caitlin dropped the kids off at my door and asked me to take them to see their dad at 5. I looked at Carlos. He nodded and left the room. The kids came back to join me, and we talked about how I was feeling and when I might get to go home. No one mentioned the 3 missing people. At 6:30, they left to go feed the kids. Carlos came back at 7:10. "I don't know what's happening, my friend. I didn't find them or see Claude's car anywhere. I can ask my friends to help look for them if you want." "No thanks, I don't care. But please ask your contacts about the North Koreans. I expected to hear from Homeland Security or the NSA by now, but nothing yet. I'm not saying Claude isn't working on it, but I want you to help too. Can you do that?" "Of course, my friend, I'll keep you updated until tomorrow." After he left, I pressed the red button. "I'm in pain and I need to rest. Can you come help me?" "Of course, Mr. McGregor, I'll be there soon." Days passed slowly. The next thing I knew, it was 5 a.m. They adjusted my bed so I could sit up, which surprisingly didn't hurt my arm or ribs this time. They took more blood, replaced some bags, and asked if I was ready for a bedpan. When I said no, they gave me some pills and told me I needed to use the restroom soon. The nurse and orderly were so calm while discussing my needs that I didn't even feel embarrassed. The thought of using a bedpan again made me ask when I could get up and go to the bathroom. They said I would need to talk to Dr. Wong, tidied up, and left. I sat there wide awake, looking out the window at the dark sky and shining lights. I thought, what now? And started to plan my next steps. The same team that helped me last night came in at 8 with a big cup of coffee and a breakfast taco. My son and daughter didn't say much, just that they had watched TV while Caitlin was busy on her phone. So where is Mom? She hasn't come with you lately. Grace replied. She told us to say she had a meeting this morning and hopes you feel better. I looked at the others and they shrugged. Dr. Wang came in and asked everyone to step out for a moment. He stood beside my bed. Mr. McGregor, I want you to know that my name is Korean, but I was born in Texas and I am an American. I'm telling you this because I just found out how you got your injuries. That hasn't been a concern for me, Doctor, I said with a smile. I'm grateful for your help, and the care here has been great. My only question is how much longer I'll be here. He smiled back. You've been a wonderful patient. This is mostly because you are strong and healthy, and you are getting better faster than usual, which makes me look good. I know you are impatient, but we need to make sure the infection is completely gone and the 2 wounds are healing well. After that, we'll get you started on physical therapy before we can talk about anything else. Well, can I at least get out of bed to use the bathroom? I think that would be okay. You can, but you will need to bring the IV with you until we finish the antibiotic drip, he said with a smile. I thanked him a lot, and he left to finish his rounds. The family came back, but the kids were already tired of being in the hospital. They decided to leave in 15 minutes and go to the nearby children's park. Carlos tapped his chest, saying he would stay. Worried that their mother might pull away from me, I hugged them tightly during the 15 minutes. They could feel my emotions and started to hesitate about leaving. I didn't want them to feel bad, but I told them not to worry about me. They should go have fun and visit longer later. They liked that idea and left with 3 of their uncles. Carlos shut the door and sat beside me. My contacts in San Diego think they have an idea why the Koreans are after you and your ex-wife, and they are following their leads. They warned that you should expect a visit from some government agency soon. About your ex and her friends, I put someone on them after our talk yesterday. Clay and Claude aren't at Wyndham Gardens anymore. They have moved to the Baymont. They left a message for Brian, but didn't say why they switched hotels. Caitlin rented a car yesterday. This morning she brought the kids to Chris, nervously told him she had another meeting and asked if we could look after them until 6. Chris tried to ask her what was happening, but she seemed very anxious and said she couldn't talk about it. Then she hurried back to her car and drove away. One of my guys is watching her, and 3 are on Clay and Claude. They are taking turns, so the brothers might not see them right away, but it will be hard to keep that up for long. Carlos pulled out his buzzing phone, checked the screen, winked, and answered it. They spoke quickly in Spanish for a few minutes before he put the phone back in his pocket. Both cars drove directly to the parking garage of the old Sperry Hotel. They arrived about 5 minutes apart and parked on the 2nd level. They went into the hotel through a walkway, past the ballroom, and into a hallway. Caitlin went first, and soon after, they saw Claude and Clay walk into a room at the end of the hall. We think she went in there, too. The hotel has its ballrooms, meeting rooms, and some suites on the 2nd floor, but my team is waiting for more instructions before checking things out. If they start snooping, they might be noticed, but we won't know what's happening unless someone takes a look. I was deep in thought about sending someone to investigate when Carlos received a message. Hey, no problem. One of my relatives works at the hotel. He's going to find out for us. So, my friend, what do you think is going on? This doesn't make sense to me. Me neither. The easy explanation is that Caitlin is involved with one or both of them. If that's the case, they're not doing a very good job of hiding it. Caitlin was all about me and then she suddenly disappears? They must think I'm not aware of what's happening. So, are they involved in something else? If so, what could it be? I can't see that being true based on what we know. No, it seems more likely that they are meeting someone and don't want us to find out. Can you find out who rented the room? Carlos sent another text. I realized I didn't know where my phone was since I hadn't needed it since the incident. but I understood I needed it now. I called my nurse and asked her to help me find it. She didn't know where it was either, but said she would look for it with my clothes and shoes. She found it, of course, and found a charger that fit, brought it to my room and plugged it in where I could easily reach it. That's a nurse going above and beyond. Carlos looked curious when he read the reply to his message and raised an eyebrow at me. All they could tell me is that 3 rooms were rented by the FBI, but the people in those rooms aren't from the local office. Okay then, looks like your sources were right. I need to get ready for an interview. I checked my phone, saw it was on, and made 2 calls. The physical therapist arrived right after lunch. Though she was gentle, the treatment wasn't very helpful. She suggested I wasn't quite ready yet and would check back each day. Using my phone, I sent a message to a business partner in D.C. who owes me a favor, took a pain pill, and fell asleep. When I woke up, I read the reply from my contact in D.C., sent a message to Carlos, and wrote a couple of notes. When my nurse came in after I called her, I complained loudly that this room was too hot during the day and too cold at night. She rolled her eyes at my complaint but looked puzzled when I handed her the note and put my finger to my lips to signal her to be quiet. She read the note, looked around the room with a frown, nodded, and left. The kids and their uncles came back at 5:15, full of energy. They shared stories about all the fun they had, but I could hardly keep up because they talked all at once. I figured out they played on all the equipment at the park, including a spinning barrel. They went to see a movie about training a dragon and then went bowling at a fun place with barriers for the kids to play with. After a few questions, I learned more about their time with their uncles between hospital visits. They were excited about all the fun they had, and their uncles seemed to share in that joy. Each uncle would occasionally encourage the kids to add more to their stories. They left at 6 to meet their mom for dinner, but promised to return by 8 in the morning to be with their dad. I called Chris over before he left and said, "Chris, please tell my ex that I'm disappointed she hasn't come to see me, and thank you for taking care of my kids." I reached out my hand for a handshake, and although he looked a bit puzzled, he accepted it. He said they enjoyed their time just as much as the kids did. Understanding showed on his face as he felt the note I had slipped into his hand. He said he would share my message with Caitlin, and they would be back early in the morning. I silently mouthed, "Read it right away." He nodded and left. As soon as they walked out, my food arrived. While I was eating, Carlos showed up. Before he could speak, I put my finger to my lips and glanced around the room. He nodded in understanding, and I said, "Hey, good to see you. How are you doing?" He replied that everything was fine and winked at me. "I'm tired of being cooped up in this room, and the sun wakes me up early every day. If I can get the nurse on board, will you help me move to a different room?" I told him I'd be happy to help, and I pressed the call button. Carlos looked around my bed and IV stand, but he didn't find anything unusual. My favorite nurse walked in, hands on her hips, and asked, "What's going on now?" "Can you move me to the empty room across the hall? I'm really tired of how cold this room is, and the sun is too bright in the morning. If I can move now, my friend will help you with it." She looked a bit annoyed for a moment, but then said my doctor approved the move. They rolled my bed into the other room and got everything set up. I thanked her, and she said with a serious tone, "You're welcome. I hope I'm wrong, but we'll have a security guard watch the hallway." Before I could say anything to Carlos, he was already on the phone. When he hung up, he said, "My team will be here to check both rooms in about 10 minutes. Whatever devices we find will help us understand who we're dealing with." In my new room, everything was clear, but in my old room. We found 2 listening devices there. They aren't usual listening devices that government agencies use, but they are advanced. We checked them out, but decided to leave them where they were. "Do you want us to take them?" "No, let's keep them, Julio. Is there a way to find out who placed them? The signal is weak, so it's sending information to someone nearby. I can hide a camera and see who comes to take them away. In the meantime, make sure no one is wandering around your room and setting up more devices." After his team left, Carlos told me more. "After your warning, my team looked for followers and spotted Caitlin quickly. We can't talk to her, but she seems afraid. It looks like she was threatened to make her cooperate. Did you send her a message?" "I passed a note with Chris. Keep your fingers crossed. What about the Edwards brothers? I don't understand it. It's like they are stuck at home by someone, but why?" Anyway, they're staying in their new hotel suite without going out, not even to eat. The next day started off normally, with no sunlight blinding me. I had breakfast, had a low-key visit from the kids and their uncles, and Chris whispered to me that he delivered my message to Caitlin. She read it at her door, looked surprised, and nodded a little. He also whispered that they were very watchful and would protect the kids no matter what. Physical therapy came after they left. It was tough, but I pushed myself to do more than before. Then 2 men dressed in suits like federal agents came right after the therapist. My nurse led them into the room and then walked away. "Mr. McGregor, I'm Joe Gennardi, and this is Michael Finn. I work for the FBI, and Mr. Finn is with the CIA. They showed me their badges and asked if we could talk. I asked them to hold their badges up high so I could take close-up photos of them. They weren't happy about it, but they went along with it. You want to talk about E? I asked. We want to hear your side of the story about the kidnapping and the following shootout where 7 Koreans lost their lives near Fort Davis. Sure, I can do that, but first I want to make sure I'm not a suspect or being investigated. You haven't told me my rights, so I assume I'm not, but I'd like you to confirm that before I continue. My phone was still in my hand, making it clear that I was recording our talk. They exchanged glances, and Gennardi said, "We are in the information gathering phase. I can't say where the investigation will lead or who might become a suspect. You are not a suspect right now. You are someone who might help with our investigation. All right, let me get us some coffee to start." I called the nurse's station to order 3 cups. Fortunately, Sheriff Goodson and my lawyer, Monroe Carr from Carr and McLaughlin, arrived just in time to bring us the coffee and 2 extra cups for themselves. Strangely, the special agent and case officer did not seem very happy to meet another law enforcement officer or my lawyer. You wanted to hear my side of what happened when my children and ex-wife were taken, and others were hurt or killed. I can only speak about my actions. During the chaos outside, I was in the RV, injured from 2 gunshot wounds. Still, I will share the events I remember while I was awake. I shared my story, starting with the choice to take the scenic route, which the sheriff suggested, and ending when I lost consciousness between the front seats of the RV. They did not take notes, and I did not see them recording anything like I was. As time passed, their questions made me feel like they thought I knew something important about the North Koreans, or that I was somehow connected to them. Although it was not said out loud, there was a sense of pressure in the way they asked their questions. Deciding enough was enough, I wanted to bring the conversation to an end. Gentlemen, I have already told the FBI everything I know about Robert Jr.'s connections with groups and people involved in questionable activities. I did not meet or work with anyone I thought was involved in terrorism or with groups that the U.S. government has restricted. I don't know anything about any connections Robert Jr. might have had with North Korea. I did not engage with their government or anyone representing them, nor have I had contact with them since leaving my last job. I truly don't know how I can help you more. I have no more documents to share, and I can't recall anything that might be useful. I want to help, so if you have a specific question, please just ask. Beating around the bush is not helping us. Finn asked if they could talk in the hallway for a moment. I shrugged, and they stepped outside. They spoke briefly, then made a phone call. What's going on, Sheriff? I don't understand why North Koreans or anyone else not connected to Robert Jr. would take Caitlin and the kids. I thought they would want a ransom. These 2 seemed to think it was not just luck, and that Caitlin was chosen for some reason. Do you know why they think that? No, but I found out today that they have asked Caitlin, Clay, and Claude many questions over the past 2 days. Oddly, none of them have asked for a lawyer. The Edwards boys know enough to ask for help unless they realize they might be in trouble, which they are, based on what these 2 have said. Caitlin should know she needs a lawyer, and if she doesn't, the boys should have told her. Either the questions they asked were very different from yours, or... I don't know. I can't see why someone would be questioned for 2 days by federal agents without a lawyer. Monroe said, "They're coming back. Let's hear what they say this time. I'll step in if things get out of hand. Mr. McGregor, we need to inform you of your rights and continue this conversation formally." Monroe quickly stepped in. "My client is ready and willing to help you, but he will not say anything more until you explain the purpose of the investigation. It will take weeks before he can leave the hospital, so even if he is arrested, he will need to be questioned here with me present. You either need to be clear about your intentions and ask for his help, or this conversation is finished. You understand that we can keep your client under certain laws. That would stretch those laws far beyond their original intention, and if you do that, Sheriff Goodson and I will be on the news tomorrow, while my partner speaks with a local judge who can order my client's release. Wouldn't it be easier and less embarrassing for you to just be honest with my client? He wants to cooperate, but if you plan to keep searching for someone to blame instead of explaining the involvement of certain foreign groups in the case of an American citizen and her 2 children, then we won't participate. We'll be back in a moment, said Finn, and they stepped out to make another phone call. The High Sheriff shook his head and said, "This is nonsense, so don't go along with it unless they are honest. They say they want information, but I think they just want someone to blame. Rob, I don't get how you fit into this, but it seems like the guy who risked his life to try to stand up to 5 foreign criminals and got hurt in the process is their main target right now." He shook his head again and looked up at the sky with his hands open. In short, they returned, apologized, and spoke in a lot of official language. We think we have a good reason to believe. Seeing my impatience, they shared that they had learned from a source that the Koreans were looking for us at the request of some unknown people. They didn't just happen to find us by chance. They knew our location. Their source mentioned that the remaining Koreans didn't know who gave the orders, only the woman in charge knew, and she was no longer alive. However, they concluded that it had to be someone with a lot of money and strong reasons for acting. A very expensive RV had been bought not long before, and the sheriff discovered a large amount of cash hidden in a secret spot, along with other items. Finn and Jernigan said that Caitlin was the target. However, if I didn't order the kidnapping in response to her betrayal, they weren't sure why it happened. This didn't feel right to me, so I pressed for more information. They then wondered if it had something to do with Robert Jr. Maybe Caitlin had some information she thought was unimportant. They waited for my reply. I shrugged and said, I hadn't seen or spoken to her for nearly 5 years until she showed up at my door a couple of weeks ago. Next, they asked about my relationship with Caitlin since she came back, my ties with Claude and Clay, and her relationship with them as well. Despite their questions, my gut feeling told me there was more to this situation than just the kidnapping and chaos. In fact, it felt like they were trying to confuse things instead of clearing them up. My intuition suggested that they believed Caitlin and I, or Caitlin with Clay and Claude, were involved in something that caught the attention of the North Koreans or their mysterious leaders. I couldn't make sense of their ideas, and the only other thought I had was that this whole investigation might be hiding something for a purpose I couldn't figure out. Gentlemen, if we want this to end well for you, I need to know a few things. I'll do my best to help if you can be honest about these matters. Can you do that? To the best of our ability, yes. This is an ongoing investigation, so we can only share a limited amount, answered Special Agent Jernigan with a serious tone. I knew he wasn't being entirely truthful, but I didn't have much to lose by asking. Do you think the kidnappers were working for their government, or were they hired by someone else? Right now, we aren't sure, replied Finn. But you lean toward the idea that they were hired, correct? I asked. He shrugged. I'll take that as a yes. Any idea who or why? I asked. Honestly, Mr. McGregor, those are the questions we are currently trying to answer. The men in custody are not helping with the investigation, even though they could face long prison sentences. They are using lawyers assigned by the court and have been told that cooperating might help their situation. We thought we would get more information when their lawyers came forward, but when they were brought to court, they said they couldn't speak English and needed a court-appointed lawyer, one officer explained. They rejected our offer for help from the embassy, which doesn't make sense if they were involved in government matters. But it's strange that they wouldn't have a lawyer if they were hired for this job. I responded, So, you have 2 of the men who took my children and ex-wife men whom I shot in self-defense in federal custody, yet they are not helping. So why are you asking Caitlin, Clay, and Claude questions, and why haven't they visited me in the hospital for the last 2 days? They hesitated. We wanted to talk to you first, to get your side of the story before— Enough! Don't pretend to be so naive. You cannot honestly believe that the men responsible for our safety who sent an armed team with us would have planned to have us attacked along with my family. That suggests you are up to something suspicious or are trying to blame the North Korean government. My ex-wife, my children, the leaders of my security team, and anyone connected to this incident will be getting legal help from Mr. Carr and Mr. McLaughlin. If they agree, they will stop cooperating with your investigation. Why am I doing this? Because your investigation seems to be avoiding the real question: who hired these criminals and why? I don't understand where you are heading with this, but your mysterious source seems to be distracting you from the important questions. Monroe stepped up. Actually, Mr. McGregor, Miss Sterling, Clay, and Claude Edwards each spoke with my partner this morning. They've all hired our firm, so we will be there if they talk to law enforcement again. Well then, I said casually, thanks for coming. I appreciate the talk, but now I need to rest. They looked unhappy about the news, but they shook hands and thanked us before leaving. I turned to the sheriff. What do you think? He rubbed his face thoughtfully and frowned. First, don't trust them. Second, this investigation feels off track. Third, something about them seems odd. That doesn't seem like real federal agents. Carr thought for a moment before saying, I agree with the sheriff. I'm eager to meet with my partner to hear what the other three have said. Do you want to talk to your wife? Ex-wife now? She's at the office and I can have her brought here. I don't think she should drive alone since they are following her, and we have questions about who they are. Yes, please, as soon as possible. And get the Edwards boys here in about an hour. Something isn't right and we may need their security teams. As soon as they left, I sent pictures of the federal agents to my contact's assistant in D.C. to check their credentials. My nurse came in to check my vitals, and I took that chance to let her know that I would be having meetings in my room for the next 2 to 3 hours and preferred not to be disturbed. She looked surprised, but said she'd try, although my doctor and physical therapist would be hard to keep away. Caitlin barely entered before the tears started, and she began explaining. I'm so sorry, Rob. They said they would take me into custody and Logan and Grace would go into state care if I had any contact with you. They are with the FBI and CIA, so I had to listen to them. I raised my hand to pause her and said, It's okay, Caitlin. I understand. Unfortunately, we don't have much time to go over everything right now. Move your chair closer, sit down, and hand me your phone. She did as I asked, and I turned off her phone and removed the battery, placing it on the table next to us. She looked like she wanted to discuss something more personal, but I interrupted. We need to sort things out, so use this notepad and let's go over what you were told, what questions you were asked, and how you answered. When Clay and Claude arrive, we will do the same with them. She turned pale and exclaimed, Rob, they warned me that they were watching, and if I met with Clay or Claude, they would take us into custody and accuse us of conspiracy. I don't think that will happen, so let's focus on your talks with the agents. The hour went by quickly, and I became more convinced that this whole investigation was not real. Clay and Claude showed up at 3. I told them to turn off their phones and take out the batteries. They frowned but complied. I explained what Caitlin had been told, and they shared that they received the same threats. We then had a brief meeting to organize our thoughts. No whiteboard, Claude. The notepad will be our way to keep track. You lead the way. Let's go. When someone brought up a question they had been asked, we each shared our responses if we had been asked the same or a similar question, along with any other helpful information. One of us then began looking into the reasons behind the question, hidden motives, and how much the answers helped the questioners. By 4:45, a lot had been discussed, but there was still much to cover. They had been interviewed on and off for 2 days, but we had only a couple of hours to wrap things up. Let's take a break for 90 minutes so I can see my kids while you grab some food. We will continue at 6:15. Before you leave, Claude, do you think we should bring the rest of the security team here, or at least some of them? I think we should. The more I learn, the more suspicious this feels. I'll make the call as soon as we leave. No, Claude, I'm worried that your phones might not be secure. Meet the 4 musketeers in the lobby when they bring the kids. Use Carlos's phone and ask him to have all 3 of your phones checked. I might be overly cautious, but my original hospital room was not safe. Clay and Claude exchanged glances, looked at their phones, and Claude said, That makes sense now. Caitlin had been watching me with concern. When I turned to her, she said, Rob, I want to stay here with you and the kids. I'm not hungry, and I haven't spent time with you for over 2 days. I've been so stressed that I can barely talk to our children." In a calm and professional tone, I replied, "Why don't you go eat with Clay? You will have tonight to be with them. I'll only have an hour." She looked confused. Clay seemed surprised. Claude looked worried. "Rob, what are you saying?" he asked after a pause. "I'm not saying anything in particular. The others will be here soon. It's best for you all to head down to the lobby and meet them. Also, Sheriff Goodson might be with them. If he is, let him know we've been meeting. If not, ask one of the others to call him. He might want to stay away, or maybe he'll come." Caitlin started to speak, but Claude gently took her arm, got her attention, shook his head, and led her away. Clay followed. I then looked down at my phone. Later, I learned that the meeting downstairs was tense. The Musketeers were cool towards Caitlin and the brothers. The kids were eager to reach my room and barely acknowledged their mother before getting on the elevator with Ron and Brian. Chris stayed with Carlos, who called his team to meet them in the lobby. Caitlin struggled to hold back tears before turning to Chris in frustration, asking, "Why is everyone acting so distant towards me? I don't understand. Is it because we weren't allowed to talk to anyone?" "I don't." Claude stepped in front of Caitlin, nodded at Clay, and firmly said, "You two come over here, we need to talk." Chris watched calmly while Claude had a serious conversation with his brother and Caitlin, which included some pointed words and close attention. He then turned his anger toward Caitlin, who cried and shook her head, saying, "No, no!" Claude raised his voice. "Something happened. I know Rob too well. He's upset about something you two did. What is it?" Seeing Caitlin cry and hear her say, I don't know," made Chris walk over. "Maybe I can help. Rob knows that you two were close before the police got involved, and he saw that you missed a chance to see him to be with Clay. He thinks he knows what happened. And honestly, we all can see it too." Clay looked uneasy, while Caitlin seemed shocked. "But that's not... Caitlin, if you have a good reason, you need to explain it to Rob, not to me. He doesn't trust you, so be ready for his doubts. He knows there's something between you two, don't shake your head. We all saw it several times, starting at La Kiva and continuing at the mountain lair. When he found out you were with Clay instead of him, what did you expect?" Caitlin frowned at Clay, closed her eyes, and said, "You tell them. I'm going back to tell him." Grace was sharing a fun story about their horseback ride at Uncle Ron's friend's ranch. Doss was lying on the bed with me, his head on my arm, nearly asleep. The adoptive uncle stood beside the bed, smiling and adding comments like caring relatives do, when the door suddenly opened. Caitlin, who had left a little while ago, returned looking determined with a serious expression. She closed the door firmly and took over from Grace. "Excuse me, honey, but I need to talk to your daddy." She paused as Carlos and Chris came in, then continued. "I found out that you, Rob, and everyone else think Clay and I are having some kind of romantic relationship. I'm here to say that we do have a relationship, a very strong one, but it's not romantic. It's supportive and friendly. Yes, Rob, Clay and I were together, and I did miss one visit to be with him. He also joined me and the kids for a meal, and we talked while they played. So, about the night I didn't come here, we went to the library where Clay had booked a room with a computer. He logged into his Skype account and introduced me to his counselor in Austin. After he left the room, I had my first therapy session ever. I learned a lot in just 1 hour, and realized that I needed this for a long time. You all might be able to handle tough situations without any problems, but I can't. I've been carrying trauma ever since I understood that I hurt my life by being with Robert. I should have looked for help, but instead, I thought I deserved to feel this way because I made foolish choices. I tried to push through the anxiety and sadness, but it has felt like a heavy cloud over me for nearly 5 years. Since I found the courage to visit you 2 weeks ago, Rob, my emotions have been everywhere. Part of me feels grateful that you welcomed us into your home, and part of me wants to piece our lives back together. It's been a difficult time for me. Now let's talk about real hardship. I'm not someone who wants to hurt others, but I've flown a drone in tough situations, been near bullets flying past me while I was with my kids, and witnessed many people lose their lives. I've been in a scary situation where someone threatened me and my children. I saw her and several men get hurt right near me. I defended a rescuer who was in danger, and in doing so, I had to confront another man. I've held the most important person in my life and tried to help him when he was hurt. You may handle these things better than I do, but I am not as strong as you. I admit that. Clay understands because he faced his own struggles from being in tough situations, and he listens to me, just as I try to support him. You're right. I do care about him. I share things with him that I haven't shared with anyone else, except for the counselor he introduced me to. He helps me face my fears, and I help him with his, but our friendship is completely just that, friends. I love only one man in a deeper way, and I've only loved one man like that. That man is you, Robert Roy McGregor, and it's hard for me to believe you can't see how I feel. I truly mean it with all my heart. I've learned my lesson. Can you imagine how worried I was when those men said they would take my children away if I talked to you? I chose to meet with my counselor instead of spending time with you, since that was when she could see me. I was looking forward to being with you afterward, and then they warned me that my children would be taken from me if I did. I know you have doubts about me for good reasons, but I promise you that Clay and I are just good friends, no, best friends. We are not, and will never be, more than that. You need to understand that I only want one partner for the rest of my life, and that is you, Robert Roy McGregor. It was quiet for a long time as we all processed the emotions in the room. Even Grace looked surprised and didn't know what to say. Doss was the only one not paying attention. He was asleep. She was waiting for me to respond, but my thoughts were focused on everything that had happened that led me to believe Caitlin and Clay were close in a way I didn't like. If they started talking after I woke up and got better, and she finally had time to think about how she felt. Then her explanation made sense. She had to stay strong during the tough times, especially when she was trying to help me and later while I was in the hospital. Once I started to recover, she felt she could relax a bit. When she finally relaxed, she realized just how much everything had affected her. If those agents hadn't stopped her from seeing me, she would have told me how she felt, and that Clay was there to help her. So, in short, Clay isn't involved with her that way. He's just helping her. He's helping her cope with her feelings after everything she went through, like being part of dangerous situations and struggling with the fear that came with them. By the time I figured this out, everyone in the room was looking at me. Doss was still sleeping. So, if I hear you right, I may have jumped to the wrong conclusion about you and Clay. You are two young people who care for each other, but it seems that bond is based on shared challenges, not romantic feelings. Your sudden absence after going somewhere with Clay was just bad timing. You would have returned the next day, but the agent stopped you and warned you not to talk to me again. That's why you disappeared, not because you were having an affair. A smile replaced her worried look as she moved closer to the bed and gently brushed my sandy blonde hair. You're not slow, but it takes you a bit to catch up, doesn't it? Yes, Rob. Clay and I share a strong friendship built on understanding. Yes, the timing was unfortunate, and yes, I distanced myself not because of any affair, but because of the agents. If you just had a little more trust in me, you could have avoided all this unhappiness you put yourself through. Well, we do have a past, I started to say, but she put a finger on my lips to hush me. That's behind us. Right now and in the future, you can trust me completely. She turned to Brian and said, Toro, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you, Coyote, and Gato taking care of our beloved ones all day for several days. Caitlin, can I ask you a favor? Will you take the kids back to the hotel and have one of you stay with them until I get back? I need a few minutes alone with this guy before Clay and Claude return, and we have another long work session. Chris chuckled. Of course we will, and we'll do it again when the big guy here is feeling better. Everyone laughed except Caitlin, who frowned and asked, What does that mean? Chris shook his head, smiling, and motioned for them not to explain in front of Grace. Brian gently picked up Doss, who was still sleeping, and the group made their way out of the room. Carlos was the last to leave. Before stepping out, he turned and said, I'll be downstairs. Text me when you're ready to start the next session. I've got some news you'll want to hear. I nodded and replied, And I have some news for you too. See you later, my friend. As soon as the door closed, Caitlin's expression changed. She gave me a playful look, her eyes twinkling with mischief. I should make you pay for doubting me, she teased. Hey, remember I'm injured here, I protested. You can't be mean to someone in my condition. She grinned and walked over to the side of the bed, her fingers twitching in a playful, tickling motion. She lifted the blanket and lightly ran her hands over my uninjured side. Her touch was soft, but the intent was clear. She was in control. "You said no messing around earlier," she reminded me, her tone half joking. "I've changed my mind," I quickly replied. She laughed, leaning in close. "We'll see about that." With that, she settled beside me, still teasing, making sure I knew she was calling the shots. Despite the light-hearted tone, she stopped short of pushing things too far, respecting my state but still keeping the atmosphere playful. I couldn't help but smile at her antics. Even in moments like this, she had a way of making me feel both relaxed and on edge, all while keeping things light. For now, we just enjoyed the quiet time together, knowing the serious work would come soon enough. I had no pride left. I was practically begging her to let me finish when she suddenly stopped, took a deep breath, and sat beside me. "No more of this until you decide whether or not you want me for real, Rob. No more until you figure out if you can trust me," she said firmly. She leaned in closer, her voice softer but still full of emotion. "Have you made up your mind yet, Rob? Because I'm tired of waiting for your decision." I was struggling to find the right words, my thoughts racing. She leaned forward close enough that I could feel her warmth and looked me directly in the eyes. I still couldn't speak, but I could feel the tension in the air. She knew I was conflicted and she wasn't going to let me off the hook easily. "Tell me the truth," she whispered. "Were you jealous when you thought I was with Clay? Admit it, and maybe we can move forward." Her question hit me hard, and I knew there was no point in holding back anymore. "Yes," I said quietly. "I was jealous. It hurt seeing how close we had gotten again and then thinking you had left me for him. It made me mad." "And jealous?" she pressed, her voice calm but insistent. "Yes, jealous," I admitted. "Mad and jealous." She smiled slightly, knowing she had gotten me to be honest, but there was still an underlying tension between us. I knew I had to figure out what I really wanted, but in that moment, I could only focus on the fact that we had been through so much together. As we sat there, the intensity of the conversation faded, replaced by a sense of quiet understanding. We were both worn out from the emotions, and I could feel that this was a turning point. She was waiting for me to make a real decision about us, and I knew I couldn't keep her waiting forever. For now, though, we just sat in silence, both of us knowing that more needed to be said, but not quite ready to say it. Suddenly, she gathered her strength, straightened up, and swung her leg over mine, moving off the bed and standing beside it. I lay there, my body tense as she caught her breath. She quickly composed herself, fixing her clothes, buttoning her shirt, and smoothing down her skirt. She gave me a teasing smile, knowing she had the upper hand for now, but we both knew that neither of us would get much sleep tonight. The tension between us was still thick, and the air felt charged with unspoken words. But doubt crept back into my mind. Could she really be honest about everything? Or would she leave and turn to someone else like Clay? Maybe even Claude. That thought twisted in my chest. "Don't go there, Rob," she said sharply, clearly reading my expression. "You know it's not true, so don't let your mind wander. I'm yours if you want me now and always. The real question is, do you want me?" Before I could answer, there was a knock at the door. Claude, Clay, and Carlos entered the room, completely unaware of the tension moments before. Caitlin tried to stand calmly a few steps from the bed, but her flushed face gave her away. I managed to pull the sheet up just in time, but the situation was obvious. Claude sniffed the air and let out a soft whistle, grinning. "Something smells interesting in here," he joked, causing everyone to laugh. Caitlin turned bright red and quickly escaped into the bathroom, turning on the water. The guys exchanged knowing glances with me, and I couldn't help but laugh along with them. A moment later, Caitlin emerged again, now composed with perfect hair and makeup and a fresh scent of perfume. She looked confident, but the light-hearted teasing continued, though it was all in good fun. Claude, still grinning, commented, "Don't worry, Caitlin, we've seen you in action before. El Coyote gave you that new name for a reason, after all. I'm just impressed Rob survived." Clay chimed in. "So does this mean one less thing to worry about?" Caitlin, now fully back in control, looked at me with a playful smile and answered, "Oh, yes. He finally admitted he was jealous when he thought you and I were off together, and he didn't put up much of a fight when I climbed into bed with him." Everyone laughed again, the tension from earlier replaced with a more relaxed, friendly atmosphere. The night was far from over, but at least the air between us had cleared a little. He might keep convincing himself for a while, but he's really in love with me again. The three men looked at me, and Carlos asked, "Really?" I rolled my eyes, nodded toward Caitlin, and said, "Sure, what man would kick her out for snacking? Just because I can't push her away doesn't mean I'm in love with her again." You didn't really answer my question. Is it true? I felt her gaze on me as I noticed how serious she looked. It had been lighthearted until now, but this moment needed a serious response. What I decided to say next would matter for our relationship moving forward. So what should I say? Should I be honest about my feelings, deny them, or choose my words carefully? Can I believe her? Can I trust her? Is she who she claims to be now? Opening up could lead to hurt, and this time I might not recover well. The safer option would be, "No, she's not right, my friend. She thinks I'm in love with her again." I noticed sadness replace her serious expression, and the same went for the three men. "She's mistaken because I've always loved her. There is no again." That little revelation delayed our meeting by about 20 minutes, and it might have taken longer if I hadn't started the meeting and urged Caitlin to sit next to me instead of lying down. She did so, but moved her chair so she could hold my hand now and then. I was tempted to send the others away, thinking I would get the best attention now that I had opened up. But we had business to discuss, so I moved forward. The way I hoped to connect with her when we were alone. Sigh. "All right, Carlos. You have news to share before we start. Also, you can relax with Clay and Claude now. We seem to be on the same team after all." Clay looked surprised. Claude smiled and said, "If I hadn't seen some of Carlos's group before, I wouldn't have believed it. They're really skilled." "What about Chica Cachanda? Better safe than sorry, right?" "Yes. Let's ask her if she wants a clear security team to keep away trouble or if she prefers our guys watching over her." "Caitlin?" "I had no idea anyone was watching me, I guess. No, what do you all think is best?" Clay chimed in. "In my opinion, both. Carlos's team is good. I hadn't even noticed them, Caitlin. But her riding with one of our teams should be a strong deterrent, and another team behind should keep her and the kids safe if they are with her. Speaking of, should we have a team with the older folks too, since they help out a lot?" "No need for that," Carlos said. "I'll make sure they are informed and well-equipped. I will have a team or two following us, and they are quite tough. Just ask the North Koreans who got out of the car at Madera Canyon. Besides, no one will harm those kids as long as one of them is safe, or I should say, as long as one of us is safe. All right, we've planned that out. I feel secure here with your men watching the hallway, a few things for self-defense under my pillow and mattress, and a police officer on duty, so let's leave that be. Carlos, what news do you have?" "My contacts in San Diego say they understand why they are after Rob and Caitlin. Rob, at one point you had some important documents that explained a plan to send Venezuelan oil to North Korea. It is a complicated and costly plan, but the North Koreans want to reduce the control their Chinese partners have over their supply of oil. They aren't sure if you still have the documents, if you've memorized them, or if you shared them with your boss and Caitlin ended up with them. What they do know is the FBI doesn't have them, and neither does their ally Robert. There is a lot of money at stake here, and some powerful companies are very interested, along with high-ranking officials in the governments of Venezuela and North Korea. They aren't concerned about your well-being, they just want to keep making money. The Venezuelans want to sell oil at a high price to gain an edge over the U.S. The North Koreans want the oil, and to a lesser degree, they also want to gain an advantage over the U.S. Claude said, "So this conflict puts us against greedy companies and two of the worst governments in the world over money and influence. Nothing to worry about there." "Oh, it could get worse," I replied. "There may be another government involved. If not, there are a few troublemakers, maybe more than a few. My source in D.C. says there isn't an active case involving Caitlin or me with the FBI or CIA. So either the agencies are working outside the usual process, or some agents are acting on their own. Just so you know, they really are agents, but Finn is recovering from an injury he got in Asia, and Jernigan is on vacation. This could be a cover for something approved, but it feels more like they are acting on their own. Still, well, great," Claude said. "What else can go wrong? Now we might have rogue agencies or agents as our opponents. Can you find out which it is, Rob? If it's the agents, we can get the agencies involved. But if it is the agencies themselves, we might need a miracle to help us. My contact was a bit worried after my report, Claude. He owes me a favor, but he said this one is on him. He believes this might be a reckless effort by the agencies, and he can't understand what they hope to achieve. I'm sure he will find the truth, but it may take longer than we have. Let's treat this like we're dealing with agents who aren't following the rules. Clearly, they are trying to appear friendly, probably hoping to get what they want without attracting attention. They don't want a big media fuss about foreign governments and companies working with American agencies against American citizens to hide wrongdoing. If the reason gets out, their plans fall apart, the oil is taken, and they lose their profits. That said, all of us getting lawyers slows down their main plan, so we need to come up with a backup plan and stop them before they can use it. I don't see them giving up, so I've been thinking hard about this. All I can come up with is something about the Windsor Group, or a similar name, trying to create a diversion by moving oil tankers at sea and in friendly ports enough times to bypass the boycott and get the oil to North Korea. Documents? I don't have any. If I ever did, I'd turn them over to the FBI. What about you, Caitlin? I've been trying to remember for 2 days with those people threatening me the whole time. I don't recall seeing anything even slightly linked to the plan Rob described. Do you still have any of Robert's papers or maybe a computer of his? I asked. A team from the company came to our house and took everything related to the business. After that, I hired a service to pack up all the rest and put it in storage before I sold the house. I found some tax documents, but nothing like what we're looking for. There was an old computer the kids used to play games on, but it's outdated. I doubt Robert put anything important on it. I looked at Claude and frowned. It has to be done, Rob, and she needs to leave. I'll go with her and bring my best team. I'll make sure she's safe. Then take my plane. I'll call my pilot. He can pick you up at the spaceport. That gives you 6 seats plus enough space for your gear and anything you need to bring back. Claude smiled. I've always wanted to fly out of the Midland International Air and Spaceport. Let me inform my team before you make that call. They might want to fly up with him instead of driving. I'll update you on that later or by morning. I'll keep the authorities busy while you're away, Clay said. All 3 of us will be tough to find, but they'll catch glimpses of me occasionally, and I have a friend in Odessa with blonde hair who will be seen with me from time to time, but only at a distance. Clay turned to me. Should I inform the lawyers if they ask? I think it's better if fewer people know, Clay. The people we're worried about aren't going to get any legal orders to arrest you, so I think it's best if Caitlin and Claude move quickly and quietly in the dark. If they discover what you're up to, they will want to be there just in case you find anything important. We don't want that, so let's keep this quiet, involve as few people as possible, and be sneaky like snakes. He can pick you up early in the morning around 4 and bring you back after dark, maybe 11 o'clock. Check with your team about the details, and I'll get in touch with Charlie. He usually needs about 4 to 6 hours notice, so get back to me as soon as you can. Carlos, can your team keep a watch on Jernigan and Finn? We need to know where they are all the time, especially now that you aren't around to help them with the investigation. With that in mind, I might want to tell Carr and McLaughlin that the 3 of you will respond to their questions through your lawyers, but not face-to-face. We can say that it's because of their threats of legal troubles. We can claim you want to help, but need time to think about their questions first. The lawyers might see it differently, but does that sound okay to you? They all agreed, so Claude called his team, who were still at the ranch near Fort Davis. They were ready to go and said they could leave within an hour. Claude said he would call back, hung up, and asked for my opinion. Let me reach out to Charlie. Charlie was also ready to go. He had checked the plane earlier in the day. It was fueled and prepared, just waiting for instructions. I turned to Claude. They will take off at 3, pick you 2 up at 4, and you will be on the ground in Houston when the sun rises. That gives you plenty of time to sort through the things in storage and get back here before sunset. That works for me. How about you, Caitlin? Caitlin looked disappointed. I wanted to spend time with you tonight, she said with a look of longing. Can we leave tomorrow night instead? Every hour we wait helps them, so we need to stay 1 step ahead. If you find something and make it back tomorrow night, we can turn the tables and take the lead. She sighed. Fine, but you owe me something for this. And I will gladly make it up to you. But keeping you safe is my top priority, and this is the best way to do that. The goodbye kiss lasted a little longer than expected before we pulled away. Claude then shared his plan to set up video cameras in the hospital room the next night to film some scenes for the movie. As Caitlin passed him, she playfully punched his arm and told him that the scene would ruin his camera anyway, so he should forget about it. I slept soundly from 9 until 3. When I woke up, I started to worry about everything that could go wrong with our quick plan. I received a text from an IHOP in Houston at 6 and another from the storage unit at 8. I went through my usual morning routine, spent some quality time with the kids, and impressed my therapist with my recovery progress. It hurt quite a bit, but Dr. Wong had assured me that both my injuries were healing, so I gave her what she wanted. Afterward, it was sore enough that I almost took the pain medication they offered, but I decided on 4 ibuprofen to stay clear-headed. The noon update from the storage unit wasn't good, but Clay's news was encouraging. The agents had spoken with our lawyers and were planning to send a few questions in writing. This meant they were either serious or stringing us along a bit longer before changing their approach. The afternoon call from Washington answered my questions, but it wasn't the answer I wanted. Why can't anything be simple? The quiet from Houston was heavy, and I began to think of Plan C at 8 when I received a text with just a smiley face. I replied with a confused emoji, but all I got back was a chair. What does that mean? Then came a video of a couple doing one of those complicated TikTok dances perfectly together, which only added to my confusion. I stopped working on Plan C and started looking up emoji meanings and dance interpretations. At 10:45, my phone buzzed with another text. I opened it to find a red racing car with a smiling lizard giving a thumbs up. Do these people not know I'm 30 years old, not 16? Sending messages with emojis, memes, and videos doesn't mean anything to me. Caitlin, Claude, Clay, and Carlos arrived just after midnight. The first two looked very pleased, while Clay, Carlos, and I were tired and subdued given the late hour. Carlos checked the room carefully and then set up the jamming device. When Claude opened his bag and pulled out an external hard drive, waving it around, the three of us perked up with surprise. Have you checked it? I asked. Yep, we call it the Mother Lode. We have important information about the North Korean oil smuggling operation and the people involved. We also learned that Robert and his associates are linked to 2 drug gangs and at least 2 groups known for violence. It seems they plan to hide money and give it to those groups for payment. When this reaches the authorities, Robert will likely stay in prison for a long time, along with several wealthy and powerful people. I don't want to spoil your excitement, but we have an issue that adds to your discovery, I said. Cheech and Chong are not working for any official agency. They are connected to some very influential people, including a few senators. This leads to another question. Did you make any copies? Tony started copying the information right away when we realized what we found. He said he would make backups, store a couple in the cloud, and take extra steps to protect the data. They don't know about this yet, so they may go all out to try to get it if they find out it's in our hands. I glanced at Caitlin, who had moved closer and was holding my hand. Where did you come across it? I remembered Robert asking me to keep some things from his mother. One item was an old, clunky safe that didn't match her nice china. He had me clear out more attractive items, so I was curious about this one. We looked closely and found a hidden space at the bottom, which held a hard drive, several USB drives, and a large sum of cash. We brought everything, but focused on the hard drive once we saw what it contained. Claude has someone going through the USB drives now. Good job, Caitlin and Claude. But we have another problem. What should we do now? If the oil smugglers find out we have this, they might try to harm us to take it back. If they know about the copies, they will likely come after us for those too. And that's just the smugglers. The violent groups and gangs would also be looking for it if they learn what we know about them. We need to get a copy to someone important. Someone who can handle rogue agents and officials, someone who can resist the offers they will get and still take action against them. Someone who understands how to deal with the gangs and those groups. Can your contact do that? Clay asked. I'm not sure. I need to call him. After I apologized for calling late, he said it was fine and we exchanged greetings. I then asked him when he could discuss a business opportunity that I thought could lead to significant profits. He suggested a face-to-face meeting, which I agreed to since it was a serious matter and we wanted to avoid any spying. He asked when and where to meet. I offered to send a plane for him, as I wouldn't be traveling for a few days or maybe weeks. He said his plane was ready to go, and he had always wanted to see George W.'s hometown, so he and a group of friends would fly out first thing tomorrow. I told him I was excited about it, and Clay Edwards would be there to pick him up if he sent the details of his arrival. That's probably a bit much, but I prefer to be safe, I explained to our team. Let's bring everyone from the ranch and include Carlos's group too. The next couple of days are going to be tough, and we need to keep our kids, the elderly, our guests, and ourselves safe. Assume that every group involved will find out, so prepare accordingly. Defending 2 hotels and a hospital seems too complex, but I shouldn't leave the hospital just yet. So you all need to find a place and plan, and make my security much stronger when we have the personnel. What worries do you have about these plans? No one spoke up, so Carlos told us, I have a place we can go. It's down a road with no end, on top of a hill, and you can see for miles. It's easy to protect since the road goes next to a deep creek from the gate to the house. I'm afraid you 3, he said, pointing at Clay, Claude, and me, have too much to do to leave, but I can take the kids, their mom, and their uncles there and surround ourselves with family until you give me the new plan. That leaves the protection teams to look after the 3 of you, your friend, and his group. I looked around the room and saw that everyone agreed except Caitlin. I don't like leaving you here. You know they will come after you when they can't find me. If you're not with us tomorrow, I will come back and get you. There's 1 guard with me, 2 in the hallway, and a few downstairs. I should be okay. I'm more worried about the other patients and hospital staff, so I will talk to the doctor first thing in the morning. Maybe we should have our discussions there, Carlos. No problem, my friend. Once we are all there, with my family and the soldiers in place, we should be fine. As long as helicopters and missiles are not used against us. Maybe Sheriff Goodson can arrange some air support again, Clay joked. I don't want to depend on our weak defenses when he has fighter planes. All right, you 3 sort out the details after you get Caitlin back to our kids and secure the hotel. Got anything useful in that go bag, Claude? He tossed 2 magazines onto the bed by my arm and handed me a stun grenade. Caitlin gave me a quick kiss, reminded me to be persuasive with the doctor, and then they left. In just a couple of minutes, Terry was setting up in my room. He told me there were guards at both ends of the hallway and a few places around the hospital grounds. Knowing I needed rest, I thanked him, took several deep breaths, and walked around my small green area for a few minutes before going to sleep. Before long, the morning routine began. Fortunately, Dr. Wang arrived at 8:15. I told him I was in danger, and that he and everyone else in the hospital were at risk too. I explained that I believed another attempt on my life might happen soon. To keep everyone safe, I planned to leave that day until the danger was gone. He wasn't pleased, but he agreed to let me go on the condition that I would return in 48 hours, or as soon as it was safe for a checkup and therapy. Terry had a car ready outside. I left through the ambulance entrance since it was less visible, and we drove away. Although no one was actually following us, other cars and trucks moved in front and behind us on the way, but they turned off after a few miles. Their drivers seemed tough, but very aware. We took the Odessa Highway for a while, and then turned onto a paved county road that wound through the desert. Just before the road ended at a ranch entrance, we turned right onto a dirt road. After a short distance, the road traced a dry creek bed. The road sat above the creek, only about 12 feet from the edge. A fence made of 6 wires and sturdy posts lined the left side of the road, leaving little room to maneuver or turn back. Ahead, I noticed a large Spanish-style house on the hill. It was covered in white stucco with arched windows featuring red tiles and a matching red tile roof. The main entrance faced the road, but you had to drive around to the right side to reach a shed. Cars were parked in the front bays, leaving plenty of space for us. About 3 or 4 acres were clear around the house. Behind it, there was a heliport, and a windsock marked a small runway alongside the west fence, about half a mile away. A courtyard with 6-foot walls enclosed an acre on the west side of the house. Terry dropped me off at a large door in that courtyard before going to park. There was a big swimming pool decorated with colorful tiles and a spacious patio. 3 tables with umbrellas surrounded by chairs were on the patio, with several lounge chairs set around the pool. Plants were scattered around the tile, and a beautiful garden grew along the walls. The garden was divided into sections by tiled walkways that led to small windows. They looked quite unusual, almost like openings for something serious. This was the most excitement I had felt since my injury, and my arm and shoulder were reminding me they were not happy about it. However, when the back door flew open and my two kids dashed out, I knelt down and waited for them. At the last moment, they noticed and ran to my right side, avoiding the bandages on my left arm. The pain from their hugs was nothing compared to the happiness I felt being embraced. After a little while, I looked up into the bright green eyes of their smiling mom, who said, "You made it. What did the doctor say?" He said it was okay, of course. I did mention I was only following his advice because you urged me to. She took my joke well and joined our little group. "Kids, can I hug Daddy now? You're taking all the attention?" They stepped back. I stood up and she leaned against me closely. My hand slipped down her back and I couldn't help but give a gentle squeeze. She looked up at me and said, "Kiss me." It was quick, but the message was clear. I thought it was worth the discomfort, even if it meant some pain. I held her tighter before we pulled back just a little. Terry came in through the thick wooden door, secured it, and introduced himself to my family. Carlos and the other guys were waiting inside, looking a bit different from usual heroes. But that was fine. As long as they could handle things well, their style didn't matter. We exchanged friendly hugs. I thanked them for helping look after my kids and Caitlin, and they invited me into what they called the Situation Room, which was really just the dining room. Papers, laptops, and devices were all over the table, while two tech workers were focused on their tasks and didn't even look up as we entered. Carlos said, "We have Viasat 100 megabits per second satellite internet here. It may not be the best, but they said it's fast enough to get the job done." Abel was standing between the table and the window that overlooked the patio. He shook my hand and said, "I'm in charge of this mission, so let me know if you need anything. There are supplies in the corner, mostly standard tools, but we also have some additional equipment if needed." "Great to see you again, Abel, and I'm glad you're leading this," I replied. "Let us know if we can help." I turned to the larger group and asked, "Have you heard from the Edwards boys?" Carlos answered, "Not yet, but it's almost noon, so we should hear something soon. Anna is making enchiladas with beans and rice cooking on the stove and a big bowl of salad. She told me 12 minutes ago that the enchiladas would be ready in about 15 minutes, so let's fill our plates and eat on the patio." Caitlin took a small amount of food for herself, noticed my full plate and those of the others, and asked, "How can you all eat like that when we're in such trouble? When you have a chance to eat, you take it. It might be a day or two before we get another chance, so fill up. Tough times need energy." I had already devoured 3 enchiladas, 2 servings of rice, beans, and salad, and was enjoying a large slice of tres leches cake when my phone rang. "We picked up a tail when we left the motel this morning. They seem to be Korean. It looks like things have changed for them. Clay called a friend and hired a helicopter. Your friend, who used to be the Secretary of State, is here with the former Attorney General of the U.S. and a security team. We're heading to the helicopter now in armored vehicles. Once we're in the air, we'll take some extra routes to confuse them before we come your way. Expect us in about 20 minutes. I acknowledged this and shared the news with Abel and the others. I added, "If they don't know where we are now, they will when the helicopter arrives. I assume they have the ability to track it since we're dealing with Koreans. I'm also assuming we have guards posted and a plan to protect ourselves, right?" After getting the reassurance I needed, I asked, "Can I look at the documents that started all of this? Are they available?" Caitlin showed me to an unused laptop on the dining room table, logged in, and opened the file. I quickly skimmed through it and realized how serious the situation was. We needed to get this information into the right hands quickly after the Secretary and General had a look. I went back to read it more carefully, searching for details I might have missed. Halfway through, I paused and called Sheriff Goodson. I told him we were just over the Midland County line in southern Ector County, and asked about his connections with the local sheriff and Texas Rangers. I also wondered if his friend in a high position had any connections in our area. He replied that he was good friends with the local sheriff, really close with 2 Rangers, and that his friends at Fort Bliss were just minutes away. I gave him a quick update on our situation, and he promised to gather more help. After finishing my detailed reading, I returned to join the group gathered around the kitchen table. Is there a safe place here for the kids and important guests? We don't have a bunker, but there's a strong old bomb shelter we use as a cellar. My grandfather built this place in the early 1950s because of fears about an attack. My mother and her sisters inherited it but didn't use it much. My sister and I bought it from them and worked hard to fix it up. My wife and kids loved this place and we planned to live here after I retired. I made it safer when problems with the local groups increased, and we wanted to move here after school ended. You know what happened to those plans, but I still come here to escape my worries and be with family. Today, the worries seem to have followed me and my friends to our haven. Grace, Doss, Caitlin, come with me. I'll show you the safe room I made for my wife and kids. You will be safe there. I walked outside onto the patio and looked around the grounds, thinking. The helicopter would arrive soon, and I knew I needed to prepare a clear and convincing presentation. The two men with Claude and Clay were powerful in Washington and had been for a long time. It wouldn't be easy for them to accept that people they had worked with were involved in breaking the very laws they had helped create and were supporting foes of the United States all for money. My phone rang. It was Claude. I quickly answered. We're coming in fast. We've been chased, and the armed helicopter is after us. Our pilot just got back from Afghanistan, and he's skilled, so we're safe. But we're unarmed and will need your help when we land. I shouted the update to the control officer at the table. He passed it on to the troops around the property, and everyone in the house got ready. Knowing they would be arriving quickly, I grabbed binoculars and one of the rifles and headed to the back wall. I realized their helicopter might block my view while landing, so I decided to go through the side gate and ran across the open ground to the shed. I set up on the west side, waiting for them to come from that direction. If they did, I would have a clear line of sight. Not knowing where the other teams were or where the local group was, I thought I would take care of any threat in my view, starting with any aircraft that came close. The pilot Clay hired is good. So good, their pursuers are firing at empty ground while he skillfully avoids them. His helicopter was silver with a large Texas flag on each side. The one chasing them was a sandy color and had no markings. The leading chopper flew in a wide circle around the house, giving our men on the ground a chance to deal with the pursuit. They were flying low and fast, which may have kept them safe from weapons. I heard gunfire, but no missiles were launched. Since they were coming from the southwest, I hurried back across the open ground and found a spot behind the northwest corner of the wall. With only one arm to use, I needed a rest, and the bottom of the wall stuck out a bit, making it possible for me to sit, rest the gun on it, and aim across the southwest sky. Suddenly, the Texas flag helicopter appeared just above the ground. It slowed and landed as close to the wall as possible. The pursuing helicopter was not far behind, but came in too close to fire effectively. The pilot flew over, circled, slowed down, and aimed for his shot. I fired at his cockpit. He pulled up and tried to retreat from the gunfire. I shot again at the underside of the helicopter before it turned and flew back behind the house. 9 men were fleeing from the grounded helicopter towards the wall. I called for them to come around the side. As they ran past me, I directed them to the side gate, assuring them I would cover them. Just then, we heard an explosion in the south. Hopefully, it meant one of our missiles hit the other helicopter. I dashed back to the door, which Clay held open for me. He quickly shut it and locked it as soon as I was inside. I saw that everyone was at their posts, ready for action. Clay led me into the house and made me sit down at the kitchen bar. He placed the large rifle on the counter and went into another room, returning with a first aid kit. He took out bandages, cut my shirt off, cleaned the wound on my shoulder, and put a gauze pad on it. I'm pretty sure Dr. Wang wouldn't approve of you running around with a machine gun, Cabron, much less firing it. I appreciate it, though. You helped us out, but you reopened your shoulder wound doing that. It doesn't hurt any worse, so it must not be too serious, I joked. Where are your brother and our guests? In the operations center looking at the papers. Once we stop the bleeding, we'll join them. I'm ready, just put a bandage on it, get me a shirt, and let's head out. He chuckled, but taped another bandage on me, tossed me a shirt from his bag, and told me to hurry. The shirt was a bit large, but then, I'm barely 6 feet tall and 200 pounds. He's 6'3" and 235 pounds. I remembered the saying, you never get a second chance to make a first impression, but I hoped the former Attorney General would give me a break given everything happening. When we met, His reaction made me think he saw me as someone who had just saved him rather than someone in an oversized shirt. He greeted me warmly. "Thank you. I thought I wouldn't be fast enough to escape danger, but then you jumped in. Great job." "General Lee, it's a pleasure to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances. If we'd known this would happen, we would have sent the information to you." My contact from Washington, the former Secretary of State, shook my hand firmly and said, "Wow, McGregor, this is the most action we've seen since we were involved in shock and awe years ago. And thanks for your help. I've never seen anyone fire a heavy weapon with one arm before, and it was incredible." Claude hugged me, stepped back, and pointed to my shoulder, teasing me. "Doc Wang is going to be so mad at you." The pilot came up and introduced himself as Paul Paveto, thanking me for my help. "You saved us!" "I just scared him off. Someone else took care of the rest. Did everyone make it out okay?" Claude replied, "So far, yes. Carlos's guards reported a couple of trucks approaching, so this isn't over yet, but at least we're ready." The 4 bodyguards were excitedly talking to Abel, who was pointing at some supplies. They rushed over to check them out. Abel smiled and said, "They think their pistols aren't enough for this situation." I turned back to the former Attorney General and Secretary of State. "What do you think about the reports?" They became serious, and the Attorney General said, "Very troubling. But what we've seen might not tell the whole story. It seems too extreme for the situation." Regardless, Rob, we plan to inform the White House and the Justice Department soon. They need to know North Koreans are involved, along with some rogue senators, at least one FBI agent, and one CIA operative. There might be more. We'll give them an hour to stop this and warn that we might go to the media if they don't. Abel then shouted, "3 trucks are getting ready to turn onto the road." "Orders?" Claude glanced at me, shook his head, and turned to our guests. "You all will need to help us if anyone comes this way, because things are about to get serious." "What do you mean?" Abel shouted. "Do we have air support again?" I smiled while everyone else looked confused. "Maybe the Texas Air National Guard is training nearby," I suggested. Our group laughed, but our guests looked uncertain. "They say 4 fighter jets just flew over the trucks, then circled back low. Some men jumped out from the trucks, and our team fired at them, while the fighter jets targeted the areas next to the road. Our team shot back with their weapons. The trucks are backing up and trying to turn around. It seems they're in full retreat. Aho! The guards to the north report that a lot of police cars are heading our way. The trucks have stopped. Tell our team to make their presence known. Maybe set off a couple of loud distractions behind or beside the convoy, so we don't leave law enforcement facing those trucks." Abel passed on Claude's orders, and soon we heard some distant sounds of explosions. "What's going on, Gamma?" Abel asked. "The convoy is halted because of an explosion ahead of it. Delta has a loudspeaker. He's telling them to stay inside the vehicles. So far, no one has gotten out." Claude spoke to Abel, who relayed, "Delta, this is command. Tell them to put down their weapons or we'll take action." "Carlos, can you call the sheriff's office and let them know what's happening?" I asked. "They should be aware of how many people are armed. Keep them updated as things unfold." There's a lot happening right now, and one of the important pieces is the former Attorney General talking to his successor. I can't hear what they're saying, but our guy seems to be doing more talking than listening. He looks frustrated and raises his voice. "I'll try to keep this off the news, but their helicopter chased us for a while, firing for a long stretch. We were shot at when we landed, and something exploded. Then 3 trucks arrived and started shooting at our guards, who were trying to keep the road safe, and they shot back. We might be in the middle of nowhere, but you can bet someone saw and heard this, so I expect a report to be on the local news tonight and national coverage in the morning." "Threat? No, a threat is when I say I'll be on national news in the morning with retired General Tom Yonkers standing next to me. No, I'm not telling you what to do, but unless you want to face serious trouble, you better call your agent and find out how involved he is in a plan to harm 2 former government officials and the kidnapping of a mother and her 2 children by North Koreans. You might want to see who else is involved and who he reports to." "What?" "Tom, come here. Mr. Secretary, are you going to stand with me on the Today Show tomorrow morning telling everyone how 2 government agencies and 3 senators worked with the North Koreans?" "What? Say that again." Okay, that's better, but let me reassure you. We have all the evidence. It's kept in safe places, and we will start sharing it in the morning if we don't see real action taken. Clear enough? Okay, we'll be waiting for your update. The Secretary of State smiled at his friend, put his phone away, and called the President's Chief of Staff. This call went similarly to the previous one, but with implications rather than direct statements. He hung up, and the two older men actually celebrated with a high five. I'm not excited about being targeted again, but it feels good to be where things are happening, the retired general said with enthusiasm. What about the CIA director? Is his person involved too? I asked. The Chief of Staff is already on it, believe me. Those two and the Attorney General will meet soon, and I think the President will join them. I smiled at him, bumped fists with Claude, Clay, and Carlos, gave Abel 2 thumbs up, and headed toward the hallway. A smiling Caitlin was leaning in the doorway, watching and listening. I held out my arm. She stepped into it, wrapped her arms around me, and gave a friendly hug. Have you been listening long? I asked softly. Long enough to know this is over, she replied. That means we can focus on our next steps. Come on, let me introduce you to our guests. Maybe it was her beautiful honey blonde hair or her friendly looks, but somehow they seemed captivated by her presence. She engaged them with charm, and those of us who knew her watched in admiration. Powerful individuals, respected and feared by many, were clearly taken by a 5 or 6 inches woman in casual blue jeans and a stylish top. After 10 minutes, she took my arm again and spoke to the group. I'd appreciate it if you could look after the kids for a bit. Rob needs some care and a little rest. I'm going to take him into the safe room and look after him for a bit. Everyone except our guests started laughing, and they both smiled with understanding. Of course, we would be happy to care for your children while you take care of your man. Should I go ahead and book a time at the hospital? I remember your warning, Carlos joked. She smiled confidently and replied, Just don't disturb our rest no matter what you hear. I promise I won't hurt him. Too much. I heard Tom say to Claude, You need to tell me that story. Claude responded loudly to Carlos, Buddy, I am so glad I convinced you to put cameras in the safe room. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.